of years ago, the inhabitants of London turned the place into an important industrial, commercial and financial centre. And at the same time, they wanted to let their hair down and be entertained. In the Middle Ages, they couldn't do this because what went on in the city was strictly controlled by the city fathers and the Lord Mayor. So they sneaked over and set up places of entertainment south of the river, where the authorities couldn't touch them.
These street names give us a clue about the kind of amusements that used to go on in this entertainment hotspot. People would have been spilling out of the taverns, all placing bets on one of the many animal contests that would have been held. Bear baiting, bull baiting and cockfighting were all hugely popular. The South Bank was also where many of London's first theatres sprang up in the 16th century. They too had to be outside the city limits because of the effect they might have had on public morals. In 1599, a company of players including Richard Burbage and William Shakespeare put up the money to build what became the #1 theatre on Bankside, the Globe. This is actually the third Globe to be built here. The first one was about 200 metres that way. And the area then was all marshland, so they had to build a platform of lime and brick to put the thing on. Now, it's right across from the city, and people would come across here by boat because the only crossing was London Bridge, and that's half a mile downstream. It's a mile round trip. So they'd run up a flag to show, like that red one at the top there, to show that a play was about to begin, and then people would get in their boats and come across. And there was also colour coding. So there was a black flag if it was a tragedy, a white flag for comedy, and a red flag for history. When they rebuilt the Globe, they did their very best to recreate the original, including the thatched roof, which was actually the reason why the first one was destroyed. They were simulating firing a cannon on the stage, and as a special effect, they fired a real cannon from the heavens above the stage, and they fired it over the audience towards the river. They didn't use a cannonball, and they didn't use much gunpowder, but the wadding caught fire, set fire to the roof, and the whole place burnt to the ground. Luckily, everyone escaped unscathed apart from one member of the audience. His breeches caught fire, and they had to put him out with a bottle of beer. Anyway, after the Great Fire of 1666, no thatched roofs were allowed in London at all, and this modern Globe is the single exception to that rule. Isn't it wonderful? This trapdoor was one of various features installed in the original Globe. They really wanted to surprise and amaze their audiences, and the effects had to be good, because if they were feeble or if the sword fights were no good, they'd get heckled by all this audience crowded round. And all these things had to be done on the cheap. For example, these wonderful marble pillars are actually tree trunks painted to look like marble. It's all a great con. They feel solid enough. The whole of the stage is designed as a sort of mini cosmos. Down there, it's hell. I know, I've been there. Up here, it's the earth, and you see it's all painted in sort of greens and browns, earthy colours. And look at the ceiling. Wonderful cosmic ceiling, with all those symbols and moons and things floating about. And quite often they would fly in actors on ropes as gods and angels and so on. But of course, it's quite tough for a modern actor, because this place now attracts both audiences and actors from all over the world. And when the actors come here, they're used to all sorts of modern equipment, but here they have to adapt to an Elizabethan stage. Now, Nick, you're an actor. Are you playing here somehow?
I'm playing Antony and Cleopatra.
That's more than half the play, isn't it?
Antony is 2/3 of the play. He goes on and on and on. I think second to Iago, it's the largest you can do.
What's this place like compared with a normal theatre?
The difference is, I think, more from the audience's perspective than the actor's perspective. As you come into this space, there is nothing between you and them. It's a shared experience.
You can actually touch one another.
You can touch one another. They lean on the side of the stage, and actors fall down and they'll be touched. The audience will go, oh, like this, and they will touch them. There's nothing to separate you from that. So it's like a much more shared experience. It's very intimate.
And presumably they throw things at you from time to time.
Not yet. I'm not ruling it out.
And you, of course, there are no lights, are there? I mean, I hadn't thought of that. It's daylight, so that...
It's daylight. You can see everybody. You can see people you know.
Right, so with the spotlights in your eyes, you can't see the audience.
Well, perhaps you'll see the first few rows, but you won't be able to see anybody. You're blinded. You're separated.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, invigorating experience. And the dynamic of the building and the wood and the acoustics. It's like nothing I've ever experienced. But for me, I've played an RSC and NT. I think this is the most vigorous, alive experience of playing Shakespeare
Really?
I've had. It's
And the
thrilling.
acoustics, you don't need microphones or anything. You can speak straight to the top.
Yes, you can.
The
You
gods.
have to be clear. But certainly you can. You can be quite intimate.
I have to say that being up there, you have got a tremendous sense of, you start projecting and your voice, you can hear your voice.
Beautiful feeling, isn't it?
Yes, lovely.
And to know that there's no metal in any of this, that it's all Dowling and old green oak.
Wonderful.
And that you're experiencing a time warp. It's an Elizabethan feeling. First time I came on the stage, I became very tearful. It was such a profound experience of the source of our most beautiful literature.
Theatre going has gone from strength to strength in London, and the West End theatres now attract 12 million people a year. The Victorian period saw a huge boom in the number of theatres being built, but they didn't tend to last very long because all the wooden stage machinery was a huge fire risk. There was a clear demand for finding a new way of operating things backstage that wasn't quite so dangerous, and the answer was the River Thames. Encouraged by the top engineers of the day, several Victorian theatres got connected to the London Hydraulic Power Company's network. Their power station in Wapping was built in 1890. They pumped water through 180 miles of pipes with a pressure of 700 pounds per square inch, providing power to venues all over the West End. And they're still using hydraulic power today, here at the Lyric Theatre. Because of the danger of fire, every theatre had to be fitted with a fireproof safety curtain like this one, which, according to the Lord Chamberlain's regulations, still to this day has to be raised and lowered at least once during each performance. Now, the problem with that is that this particular curtain weighs 12 tons, so lowering it and raising it, well, it might be difficult. Apart from this, all the stagehand has to do is that. And that lets the water in, and the high pressure water in these pipes pushes up hydraulic rams like pistons, and the pistons raise the curtain as though it was made of plywood. Isn't that fantastic? So, how does hydraulics work? Well, have a look at this. Suppose I want to lift this great heavy white stage here with this actor on it, and I can't possibly do that myself. I'm going to use hydraulics to help me. So I've got two cylinders full of water like this and connected at the bottom with a hollow pipe full of water. This one is 3 inches in diameter, and this one is 6 inches in diameter, so this one has 4 times the surface area of that one. That means that if I push down on here, I'll be pushing water down here through the pipe and up into here. But if I push down with a force of, say, 1 kilogram, that's going to be pushing up on this side with a force of 4 kilograms because the surface area is that much bigger. So the pressure is pushing up over a bigger area. On the other hand, you see it doesn't go up very far because if I push down maybe 20 centimetres here, it's only gone up 5 centimetres on this side. So what the hydraulics does is to multiply the force while actually reducing the distance travelled. And that's how you can lift a heavy actor on a piece of stage or 12 tons of safety curtain. The Victorians knew that the London hydraulic power was not entirely reliable, and so they had to install a backup system. And this is it. And basically, you have to turn the wheel around like this, and you can see that in the middle there, the pistons are going up and down and pumping the water. Now, it's pretty hard work, even though I'm not pumping any water. And they tell me that to operate it properly, you'd need 12 people working in shifts to move all that water to lift those tons and tons of safety curtain. Anyway, I'm glad to say that the main motor seems to be working today. Whew. This revolving stage was one of those innovations that was brought about by the use of electricity. In this case, the stage was powered by this electric motor here, and to get that working, that's a direct current motor. They had to rectify the current, and here
is a mercury rectifier, and I'm standing well back. And this converts the ordinary alternating current of the mains into a direct current to run that motor. Because they were so reliable and easy to use and maintain, mercury rectifiers were the most popular way of converting alternating current into direct current until the 1960s, when they were replaced by more modern electronics. The Lyric is one of very few theatres that still use hydraulic power at all, and now they pump the water from their own tank using an electric motor. So even though it cut down massively on the amount of work needed backstage, hydraulic power was soon outmoded by electric stage machinery, which provided much speedier and more efficient mechanisms for today's spectacular special effects. So, after only a few years in the limelight, it was curtains for hydraulic power in London's West End. The Victorians were responsible for changing the face of entertainment in London. Once they got their transport sorted out and there were buses pulled by horses, loads of people began to go out in the evening. In fact, it became respectable, the idea of nightlife. They built loads of theatres and music halls, but one Victorian venue stands out among all the others: the Albert Hall. The hall was built after the Great Exhibition of 1851. Prince Albert wanted to bring permanent facilities to the area, not just so people could have fun, but also to exhibit the latest discoveries in science and technology. The building is dedicated to the arts and sciences, which is why this terracotta frieze shows such a range of activities. From the first ever gramophone concert to a full-scale marathon, the hall certainly lived up to its aim of entertaining the public with science and spectacle. But there was one big problem. From the very first concert, it was clear that the acoustics were terrible. The reverberations were so bad that a conductor remarked the hall was the only place where a British composer could be sure of hearing his work twice. It's all because the Albert Hall has an elliptical shape, so the sound is all focused on certain hotspots. It took until the 1960s to get this problem sorted out, and it was these, which look like giant mushrooms or flying saucers, that solved the sound difficulties. Marvellous. Of course, not all Victorians went to grand venues like the Albert Hall to enjoy themselves, and the travelling fun fair has been providing entertainment for people from all social classes for centuries. Early fairs were really just a few amusements to entertain people trading at markets, but soon they included performing animals, fortune tellers, and illusions performed by dedicated showmen. The Carter family have been restoring all these wonderful rides to their former glory since the 1970s, and they travel around London and Berkshire every summer. They unfold their traditional fair in a park or field for just a few magical days, and this year they're making it even more authentic. This wonderful engine was built in 1913 and throughout the First World War hauled heavy loads around London. Then in the 30s it was bought by a showman who dressed it all up beautifully, painted it, polished the brass, took it to the fairgrounds, and he renamed it the King George VI. When it was just a traction engine, it used to pull things along the roads, but then in the fairground they wanted it to power rides, and so what they did to convert it was to put a dynamo on the front here, and this was powered by a belt from the flywheel back there. And with this dynamo they could generate 110 volts of DC electricity. They used the electricity to light lights all around the place and also to drive the rides. Have a look at this one. Now, Joby, you don't still use the engine to power this ride, do you?
Yes, we do. And we've been using it all season.
Fantastic.
And it pulls the loads on the road, moves them along like it would have. And at the weekend, you put the belt on and it generates power for the ride, just as it did.
Amazing. Does it run smoothly? Does it run all weekend?
Yeah, fantastic.
No problems?
You have to stop every 4 hours to oil up the crucial parts you can't get to when the motion's turning.
Right.
So they know what they're doing, so it takes them about 2-3 minutes, and that can be the time it takes to load people on anyway.
Right.
So Bob's your uncle, you carry on, and it runs fantastically without any problems.
And what's this particular ride called?
This is called the Ark, but it's been known since Teddy Andrews owned it, bought it in 1938 when it was 4 years old. He even renamed it the Jungle Thriller.
And why jungle? Was that a sort of way of drawing people in?
Jungle's always been a very popular theme, because you imagine back in the early part of this century, how many people had seen a jungle? How many people had seen an animal in colour? This was where people went to see things as near to life as they possibly could.
Right. So, Joby, this is a carousel, yes?
Gallopers. We don't like to call it carousel. That's what they call them on the continent.
Ah, okay. And is there any difference otherwise?
The difference is gallopers go around clockwise.
Yeah.
All to do with the way a lady sat side saddle. She'd sit facing this way,
right?
Which would be the same way she'd be facing in the direction of the road would go. We drive on the left-hand side.
Okay.
Now in France, Germany, America, they drive on the other side. Therefore, they sat side saddle facing the other way, so the horses went the other way. They call them carousel, we call them gallopers.
Gallopers, yes. Okay. And what powers all this lot?
The steam engine in the centre.
In the middle. Can we go and have a look?
Yes, certainly.
When was this engine built?
1895 it was built.
So it's 115 years old, 111 years old, and still running?
Yep, still going
Fantastic.
on strong.
Can I put a bit more coal in?
Of course, yes.
Okay. I'm going to get dirty hands, aren't I? Oh, well, can't be helped. Bit in there, that ought to do. Okay. So, can I have a ride?
Yes.
Which horse would you recommend?
I think you should go on my son's horse, John, on the outside.
On the outside. Okay, thanks. Get ready to power her up. Oh, it's wonderful. I haven't been on one of these for years. What I love about the gallopers is how they're all out of sync, so they're all going up and down at different times. The fairgrounds were the beginning of what has become the great theme parks of today. But perhaps more important than that, they were the first places in London where you could see moving pictures on a big screen. So they were the precursors of the multi-million-pound cinema industry. People flocked to see these new motion pictures. Sometimes they just showed day-to-day events like people going to work. But nevertheless, they were an instant hit. London was the heart of the new motion picture business. This is Portobello Road on Notting Hill. Back in 1910, it was one of the most fashionable shopping streets in London, which may have been one reason why it was one of the first roads to be electrified. So when the last plot was snapped up to make a purpose-built cinema, they called the cinema the Electric, and it's right here. Because this was the first purpose-built cinema, the architect had to rely on previous experience of music halls. So essentially this is a music hall. Look at that wonderful vaulted ceiling with all the gorgeous gilt decoration. Pity about the modern lighting rig, but you can't have everything. That ceiling must have made the piano sound lovely, because of course in the old days it was silent movies and somebody playing the piano in the front. But then talking movies came in, and it was a disaster because the acoustics are terrible and nobody could hear what the actors are saying. So to try and soak up some of the excess reverberation, they put in these soft panels. Otherwise, the whole place has been restored to its former glory, including this lovely moulding, some of it gilded, some of it plain, and most of the walls painted a pale cream colour, because in those days it was thought most improper for people of opposite sexes to spend the evening together in a darkened room. When the Electric was first built, it must have been a real flea pit because there were 365 seats in it. It's now become a luxury cinema. Just look at this, leather upholstered armchairs, very, very comfortable. Wonderful footrests, look at that. Even space to walk past the end, you don't have to move if somebody comes into the row. And then a great tray here with, I suppose, popcorn, sandwiches, a wine cooler. I don't seem to have a bottle in mine, I'm not quite sure why. There are even sofas at the back there. It is truly amazing. However, they did have one technical problem. You see the screen there is surrounded by a beautiful gilt picture frame. And as cinema developed, the format changed and the pictures got wider and wider, and they needed to be on wide screens. And here there was no way of incorporating a wide screen because that gilt frame is listed and they couldn't touch it. However, when it was restored a few years ago, they found a really ingenious way of getting around that. Just have a look at this. This 2-ton mechanism is the only one of its kind in the world, and it's a really impressive feat of engineering. After the curtains open, the screen emerges from inside the picture frame and expands sideways as it's stretched across aluminium tubing to accommodate films in a widescreen format. Now, there's something really rather special on today. OK, run the movie. London's entertainment began here on the South Bank, and it's all coming back here again, because now there are world-famous attractions like the National Theatre, the Royal Festival Hall, and one of the most popular of all of them, the British Airways London Eye. As the tallest observation wheel in the world, the London Eye dwarfs many of the capital's other famous landmarks. It's nearly 3 times as tall as Tower Bridge, and 4 times wider than the Dome of St Paul's. Doug, you're the engineer responsible for making sure this thing works. Now, it looks like a great big bicycle wheel. Is it as simple as that?
It's almost as simple as that, yeah. If you imagine a bicycle wheel with spokes, then this is what you've got.
Right, only it's a bit bigger.
It's a bit bigger.
When I first heard about the London Eye, I thought it was going to be a complete disaster. But ever since it went up, it's been one of my favourite London landmarks. It's not difficult to see why this is such a popular tourist attraction. Just look at that amazing view. The whole city, Palace of Westminster, Buckingham Palace, and over the top of that on the horizon, Windsor Castle, 25 miles away. The South Bank is a far cry from the way it used to be with all that bear baiting, but people still come here to see the city itself going past. London has become the star attraction. Canals played a huge role in the growth of London's economy. In the early years of the Industrial Revolution, the roads between cities like Birmingham and London were atrocious, and this was why the canals got built. In its heyday, the waterways network covered over 5,000 miles and carried some 30 million tonnes of freight across Britain every year. In 1800, the Grand Junction Canal was opened, running from Brentford in London up to Braunston on the Oxford Canal. This was a sort of shortcut, because the old way from Birmingham down to London was to go all the way down the Oxford Canal and then down the Thames. This cut 60 miles off the journey, but it still took 4 days. Nevertheless, in the 19th century, the canals were the motorways of the country. Richard, what was it like in the early days of canals?
There was no hard surfacing on the roads. They were muddy, rutty. Carrying goods by water is quite efficient. The boat carries 25 tonnes or more. That couldn't be equalled on the road.
No, there certainly weren't huge juggernauts, were there? But,
That's right.
but hang on a sec, they've got to pull this 25, 30 tonnes along.
Yes.
Was it men who did this?
Before they built the canals in the 17th century, they did have teams of men towing boats, yes. But they later used horses and donkeys.
But men could actually pull large loads.
Yes.
Could I pull this boat?
You could do.
OK, I'm going to give it a go. How much stuff have we got on here?
We've got about 16 tonnes.
16 tonnes of sand. And you reckon I could pull it?
And the boat weighs about 15 tonnes.
Oh, so 30.
But you can push the boat with one hand. Just lean on it.
Huh. I'm going to try. OK, watch me. Now then, I'm not at all sure that I can do this. 30 tonnes is an awful lot. OK, Richard, are you ready? OK. Just leaning into it, using my weight. Now, that's 31 tonnes a boat, and I guess we're probably doing 1 mile an hour now. See if we can go a little bit faster. Accelerating. This must be 2 miles an hour. Well, it's very difficult to get things moving. That's because of their inertia. But once it's going, it's not bad, because once it's got momentum, it's not going to lose it. There's no friction. That's the great advantage of carrying freight by water. Anyway, I reckon I've done a couple of 100 yards now, and obviously I could go all the way into London, but I think perhaps I'll let somebody else take over. Oh! I found someone to pull the boat, well, I think, anyway. This is Hector and this is Vicky, and I think Hector's going to do the pulling, is that right?
So.
He has pulled boats before, has he?
He hasn't pulled a boat before. He's pulled lots of other things, but not a boat.
How much can a big horse like this carry on its back?
Well, these horses used to carry the knights in shining armour, so sort of 30, 40 stone.
Wow. So that's about a quarter of a tonne.
Yeah, but for a limited amount of time.
And how much could it pull in a cart?
A single horse will pull a couple of tonnes.
A couple of tonnes.
Yeah.
So how much on a boat?
Probably limitless.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, do you think Hector will pull our boat?
I hope so.
OK, well, let's have a go. Go on, Hector. Steady, steady. It's a big boat back there. I know, I've pulled it. Whoa, that was a nasty shot, wasn't it? I guess they never used to tarmac the towpath, did they?
No, that's right. It's very slippery. Once he realises that it moves slowly when he moves slowly, he'll pick it up. There we are. He's starting to get the hang of it.
Oh, yes, so he has.
Horses are very quick to learn an easy way of life.
I see. I thought they had very small brains.
They have.
It's wonderful to see how Hector's learnt this new skill. He's learnt that walking on the grass is better than walking on the asphalt, and he's also learnt that it's better to go slowly because then the boat follows along rather than trying to heave along at 30 miles an hour. In fact, horses were so efficient at pulling barges, they were in use until the 1950s when tractors came in, and then of course the boats began to get engines on board. I think he thinks it's lunchtime. But not all canals are straight. So what happened at the bends? You sometimes find a curious thing where the towpath goes from a straight bit like this and then has a kink. The horse has to walk round the corner here, pulling the rope, which therefore pulls against the stones on the corner of this brickwork. So they put up this iron post to protect it. Now, the rope's wet and it's got a lot of grit on it, and it actually wears these grooves in the iron post. Just look at these. Enormous. You could hide your finger in there. Just from a wet rope covered in grit, pulling over the years against this iron post. You can see these all over the canal network. One problem canal builders had to face was the hill. Suppose you came to a hill, you had three options. You could either go round it following the contours, which was obviously a long way round, or you could go straight through it, through a tunnel, but digging tunnels was very expensive, or you could go over the top. Now, the trouble with the third option is that you can't build canals at an angle because all the water would run down to the bottom end, and here it would be dry and you couldn't get anywhere. You have to make canals dead level. So the only way to go over a hill is by building locks. In the early days of canals, the only thing they had to impede the flow of water was what was called a flash lock. Imagine you're looking along the canal here. Here is basically just a dam. That is a flash lock. And so when it was full of water, the water didn't flow through downstream. But if you wanted to go through this on a boat, well, if you're upstream there and you open the paddle, the boat would go would go thundering through, extremely dangerous. It was liable to capsize, and there wasn't much chance of your being able to go upstream. In the 1500s, they came up with an impressive but simple solution. On the canals today, there are pound locks, like this. They have two pairs of gates with a stretch of water in the middle, which is the pound. And the point is you can always keep one pair of gates shut so the water doesn't go careering downstream. We want to go down the canal, so we need to raise the water level inside the pound to match the level on our side of the lock. A windlass is used to crank open paddles in the gates, letting in up to 50,000 gallons of water. Only when the water levels are equal can we open the gates. The boat then enters the pound. So now what we have to do is to shut the upstream lock gates, and you'll notice they meet at an angle. So a mitred gate, allegedly invented by Leonardo da Vinci. And the point is that then the moment there is any extra pressure from above, that'll push the gates tight together and prevent any leakage. All right, now we have to get the level in the pond down to the level of the canal below. So what we do is to raise these paddles, because there are holes in the lock gates, and you can see the water goes streaming through, and the level here goes down and down until it's the same both here and here. And when that's the case, then we can open these gates, and then we could sail through into the canal below. This is Brentford, where the canal originally met the River Thames. Boats carrying everything from sulphur to aluminium ingots would enter and leave the canal network here. Tom, how did the canal companies make money?
They made the money by charging so much per tonne per mile, depending on the cargo that was being carried.
OK, so if you were carrying coal, then you pay per tonne of coal?
That's right.
OK,
yes.
And what's all this info here?
Well, this is actually a page from a 1924 toll register.
What's this sheep dip? Do they carry sheep on board?
No. I see it's come from Berkhamsted. It's a whole boatload, 34.25 tonnes. It was probably being exported to somewhere like New Zealand.
No doubt. Anyway, now how did they measure the tonnages?
Well, each boat was gauged, so they would take it to a special dock. They'd put 1 tonne weights in, and every 1 tonne they put in, they measured
a line.
And then they would have great big documents, and each boat would have how many dry inches for what tonnage.
So how do they measure the weights?
Well, shall I come and show you?
Yeah, terrific. OK, Tom, what can you measure with this rod?
Well, with this rod, you can measure the number of dry inches.
So the top is about 21 inches, I reckon?
21 inches, yeah.
That's above the waterline?
That's above the waterline. But what you normally did to make sure there was no cheating, you actually measured on 4 corners of the boat.
Gotcha.
So they then averaged the 4, and then went back into the toll office, looked on the charts, and then for a particular boat, that number of dry inches represented a certain tonnage. But roughly for every extra tonne you put on, she will go down an inch.
OK, so how much is there in there now with 21?
16 tonnes.
16?
Yes.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. 1801 saw the opening of a canal extension into central London. By 1820, London was encircled by waterways as the Grand Junction and the Regent's Canal were joined to form a link to the docks. This is the Paddington arm of the Grand Junction Canal, bringing all that trade down from the north. So when they built the Regent's Canal, they wanted to siphon off some of this trade, and so there is the Regent's Canal, deliberately built to join onto this stretch of water. All those people down there wanted to siphon off some of this trade from up north and take it all the way down to the Thames at Limehouse. It was a great business opportunity. The name Little Venice comes from a poem by Robert Browning, who lived nearby. A canny estate agent used the term while trying to sell a property, and the name stuck. This area of London is very built up, so when they built the canal, they had to construct 3 tunnels. And getting through those tunnels without a horse was quite an adventure. Cheers. Cutting through central London is a quiet and largely forgotten stretch of water, now home to fishermen, walkers and pleasure boats. The canals were once the heart of London's transport system. This is the Regent's Canal, a major engineering feat. And because it's going through highly built-up places, a lot of it had to go through tunnels. In fact, there are 3 of them. This is the Islington Tunnel. It's more than half a mile long. Now, when you were building a tunnel, you didn't really want to make it so wide that you could put a towpath along the side. So there you had to take the horse round and leg the boat through. Now, I'm not sure I like the sound of that, but let's see how it works. Now, Ed and Maggie, you're leggers, I think. Is that right?
I think we've been volunteered to do that, yes.
You're not going to leg this thing, are you?
We certainly are.
This is huge, this boat.
Yes, but once it's got moving, it doesn't need much effort. It's just the initial effort to get it to move.
Right. So how do you do it exactly?
You lie on your back and you walk along the side of the wall with your feet.
The side? You don't, not the roof?
The side. It depends on the tunnel. You could on some tunnels.
Right.
But on this tunnel, you'd walk from the side.
So, without further ado, we set off into the tunnel. Now, we're just about into the mouth. Could you show me how you do it? OK, so you lie down on your side and then you just walk. Well, we're definitely moving, not terribly fast, if I may say so. Oh yeah, it's working, isn't it? So you're just walking?
Yes.
Do you think I could do it?
Yes, do you want to have a go?
Oh, yes, please. So I just lie down, all comfy.
Slightly on your side.
Yes.
That's it, get your feet up high.
Feet up high, up there somewhere.
Higher would be easier.
Really?
Not too high. That's it.
Oh, hey. That's not too bad.
That's it. You need to push harder.
Harder. Right. Well, it's a bit like walking up a bit of a hill.
You have to work in tandem with the other person on the other side.
Right.
So that you both push the same amount.
The same
of
amount.
strength.
Hey, it's rather good. We must be doing...
You must be doing 2 miles.
2 miles an hour, yes. And so we've got half a mile to go. It's only going to take us a quarter of an hour to get through. Faster, Ed, faster.
I'm going fast enough. You've got to go faster.
Oh, all right, I'll do my best. I don't want to say anything, but that other end doesn't seem to be getting any closer.
We've only gone in about 80 foot.
Oh, it's dark here. I gave up after about 10 minutes, but it took Maggie and Ed another 20 to get through the tunnel. Luckily, 6 years after the canal opened, a steam chain tug was installed to tow the boats. Most of the traffic on the Regent's Canal carried goods from Limehouse docks. Coal from the north of England and cargo from abroad would be transferred from seagoing vessels to barges and narrowboats. This is Battlebridge Basin, just north of King's Cross. There were basins like this dotted all along the Regent's Canal with great warehouses, because this was where a whole mass of trade happened. Goods would come in by canal and go out by canal all over the country. And in this particular basin, there was one rather unusual form of produce. Right here, they unloaded vast blocks of ice cut from frozen lakes in Norway, and they brought it here to Carlo Gatti's ice house. These ice wells were built around 150 years ago and were in use for 50 years. They used to be 13 metres deep, and they held 1,500 tonnes of ice. Absolutely amazing. What's more, the insulation was very effective, because in all the time from when the ice was cut in Norway to when it was brought here to when it was taken out to the customer, only a quarter of the ice melted. Really impressive, that. Up there, it's a warm, sunny day, but down here, it's cool and quite spooky and extremely damp. Just look at the water running down the wall there. That must be coming from the canal. I hope it's not going to fill this place up, because it's a long way up those steps. Now, the Victorians didn't really have fridges. They weren't available. So they needed ice to keep things cool. And in fact, they used to be taken, all the ice used to be taken from here by horse and cart all over the capital and used by people in cooking, and also by Mr. Gatti and other caterers in making ice cream. Now this, I reckon, is the door straight into the canal. God, it's all rotting, look. Bits of it are just falling off. I think I'm going to move. Thanks to Mr. Gatti, ice cream became available to the public all through the year. And basically, you'd buy a little ice lick like this one. This is a sort of glass egg cup, really, with a tiny bit of ice cream in the bottom. And what you do is you take your lick like this, and then you hand it back to be refilled for the next person, passing on all your germs. Ugh. Thankfully for us, ice licks were banned in 1926. By the 1870s, competition from the railways was threatening the canals. However, there was one cargo the railways were reluctant to touch: gunpowder. The Lee River in northeast London has been used for transporting goods in and out of the city for centuries. And in the Lee Valley, there's a whole complex of hidden canals, especially useful here at Waltham Abbey, because this is where they made the best gunpowder in the world. We're in the Lee Valley here, right? Why was all this navigation business so important?
Well, the importance of the site at Waltham Abbey is that we're about 15 miles or so from the Thames. As along the Thames, it had good connections to the Tower of London that was used for storing gunpowder, and Greenwich, but it was also vital for importing the ingredients of gunpowder.
Right.
By about 1900, there's a network of about 5 miles of canals within this one factory. And this canal network was used to move the gunpowder or the later high explosives even between the process buildings.
A mixture of saltpetre, sulphur and charcoal, gunpowder, when ignited, produces huge volumes of gas almost instantaneously, and that's an explosion. Transportation by water was by far the safest option. Why did they start making gunpowder here?
So it was all a way of ensuring that the British had the best quality of gunpowder in the world.
So you reckon that was crucial for the Napoleonic Wars?
It was absolutely crucial, I believe.
Right. So is this gentleman here anything to do with that?
I think he may be.
Well, let's go and see. Excuse me, sir, who are you?
I'm Corporal Sherwood of the 2nd Queen's Royal Regiment of Foot.
And are you about to go and shoot somebody?
Well, I'm about to shoot the conkers off the tree.
Well, yeah, but that's presumably not what you're paid to do.
No, I'm going off to Spain to fight the French.
Ah, the Peninsular War. You're loaded with black powder.
I am.
And grape shot. What else have you got?
I've got a ball down there.
You have? Oh, all right. I'll stand well back. Missed! Close. You frightened it. You certainly frightened the starling out of the back of the tree. Well, that's terrific. Thanks very much indeed, and good luck in Spain. Well, transporting the gunpowder by water was as safe as they could do, but it wasn't totally without risk. In 1874, the centre of London was rocked by an enormous explosion. In the early hours of one October morning, a barge, the Tilbury, was being towed along here in this deep cutting on the northern edge of Regent's Park. As it went under Macclesfield Bridge, the 5 tons of gunpowder on board blew up, and there was a colossal explosion. The whole of the top of the bridge was lifted off, rubble went heaving into the air, damaging houses hundreds of yards away. In fact, the keel of the barge, the Tilbury, was blown into the air with such force that it fell on a house and went all the way through to the cellar. All the residents came running out thinking there was an attack. The bang was so loud it was heard 20 miles away, and the horse cards came galloping up thinking there was an Irish insurrection. It's been called Blow Up Bridge ever since. These cast-iron pillars, made in Coalbrookdale and presumably brought down on the canals, actually survived the explosion, although they were knocked over. If you look here, you can see more of these grooves where the ropes from the barge horses wore their way into the iron. But have a look on the other side, and you'll see there are grooves here too. And obviously these were the original grooves, and then after the pillars had been knocked over by the explosion, they were put up the other way round in order to equalise the wear, if you like. In the 1930s, the canals were joined together to form the Grand Union Canal Company in an attempt to fight back against competition from road and rail. But it was too late, and the canals went into decline. The end of freight carrying on the canals came with the big freeze in the winter of 1963, and all the water here was frozen solid. No barges could move for 3 months, and all the trade simply evaporated. Luckily, more uses have been found since then, obviously recreational uses, and also on the towpaths. Down here, there are thousands of miles of electricity cables cooled by the water from the canal. It was thanks to the efforts of enthusiasts that the canal's fortunes have been slowly revived. These once commercial waterways are now welcoming recreational use. When the canals were first built, nobody wanted to live anywhere near them because they were regarded as a grubby arm of industry. But now there are masses of pleasure boats, and living by the canal is highly desirable. And in fact, these houses are exceedingly exclusive. Even a mooring here costs something like £7,000 or £8,000 every year. Mind you, I wouldn't mind living here. Perhaps I could just sneak in between 2 of these boats. Transport links have always played an important part in the capital's economic growth. These days, London does much of its business on a global level, and its international status as an economic power depends on its airports, the gateways to the rest of the world.
Finding space for an airport near to a big city is never going to be easy. But somehow today, London has no less than 5 major airports, which handle some 130 million passengers every year. How did this come about? And how can we cope with increased capacity in the future?
This is Heathrow, the world's busiest international airport. And we're right in the middle of it here. Even though there are roads all over the place, there are actually planes landing on a runway over there every 90 seconds and taking off every 90 seconds from a runway over there. The reason it's so cramped is that when it was built, London was already the world's biggest city and there wasn't much room for 2 4,000-metre runways, so they had to cram it all in together.
Heathrow may be the capital's biggest airport, but it wasn't opened until 1946, and that was almost 30 years behind London's first one, which was in the savage outback of Surrey. Croydon now seems an unlikely place for the capital's premier airport, but back in 1917 it was ideal.
This is the original site of Croydon Airport, and if you look, it started over there, and the reason was they needed a long run into the wind to take off. Okay, those propeller-driven planes weren't terribly powerful, and if you go into the wind, you get more lift and you take off more easily. Now, in this part of the country, well, indeed, in this country, the prevailing wind is from the southwest. It's towards those big bushes over there, and therefore they would have wanted to go that way, so they needed to start over there and come into the wind. And we can just check and see where the wind is coming from by using a wind sock, which was how they used to do it. And indeed, you still find wind socks on airfields today. And the wind blows in and pushes it away, so you know the wind's coming from that direction. And it's slightly to the west of southwest, but very close. And because there's a weight in the end, then if it's not blowing at all, it hangs down. If it's blowing incredibly hard, it's straight out. And we've got, well, it's a fairly strong wind today. You certainly take off very easily indeed. And they take off more or less straight down this track here. So this is our runway. Now, the question is, will it fly? I think it's a bit dodgy in this wind myself. Looks like sort of 4, 5 or 6 to me. But I reckon if we, southwest, that's right, start the engine. Ready, go. Hooray! Fantastic. I'm going to go, Well, it was a moderate flight, a little bit of pilot error, but we'd probably correct that next time.
The southwesterly runway and its proximity to central London were to make Croydon Airport a major success. Flights from here went all over the world. Well, to Paris, Amsterdam and Rotterdam to begin with. It soon became the country's official customs airport, dealing with all international flights. The age of air travel had begun.
In 1928, the airport was getting busier and busier, and they built this new terminal 1.5 miles away. Isn't it fantastic? This was state-of-the-art, and Croydon was by then the busiest airport in Europe. They even built an airport hotel. Look, the Aerodrome Hotel. All the poshest people stayed there. George VI, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Mary Pickford, Amy Johnson, Charlie Chaplin, you name it. They had wonderful views of the airfield, and crowds used to gather on the roof. They had to specially strengthen the roof to take the crowds.
It's now an office complex, but a lot of the old Croydon Airport looks much the same as it did almost 80 years ago. Even the control tower at the back of the building has been kept intact with some of its original features.
Oh, the point of having a control tower is that from up here you get a fabulous view. The controllers would come out of there and they would look around and they could see all the aircraft on the ground, maybe waiting to take off or taxiing, and they could use the binoculars to spot aircraft coming in to land. Later on, when they had radios, they could signal to all of them and say, no, wait a bit, there's somebody taking off, you can land in a few minutes, or something like that. But the great thing about this is you do get a fabulous view.
And this is the control tower, and this is where the controller sat. And basically, air traffic control began here. In the early days, they didn't have radios or anything, and they used to fly, well, by landmarks. They used to fly along roads or along railway lines. And in 1922, there was a terrible crash because two pilots were flying along the same railway line in opposite directions, and they ran head-on into one another. And so then people realised they had to have rules for flying. And one of the simple rules was that if you were going to follow a road or a railway line, you kept 100 yards to the right of it. So if you were flying this way, you'd keep 100 yards to the right. Flying this way, you'd keep 100 yards to the right, and then you'd miss one another. And really, air traffic control began here at Croydon. In fact, the very first air traffic controller here, who invented a system for following each flight with a slip of paper in a little wooden frame like that, was a chap called George James Horatio Jetts. And look at that, he's got air traffic control certificate number 1.
Low cloud, fog, or any really bad weather were real problems because visibility was so poor the control tower wouldn't be able to see the aircraft. In fact, the pilot wouldn't know where he was, but luckily the air traffic controllers could work it out using radio.
Now, the way they did that was to send in a radio signal here to Croydon and ask for a fix. And there was a bloke sitting in this chair with his headphones on and his microphone, and he would say, OK, put out a signal. So the pilot would then put out a continuous signal. And the chap sitting here would use his goniometer here. He'd twiddle this round, listening for the strongest signal coming in. And suppose it was just 90 degrees, like that. That was the strongest. Then he'd go over to the map here and he'd pull out this bit of string from Croydon at 90 degrees, like that. And he knew that the aircraft was then somewhere along this line. But of course he didn't know how far along the line. However, the same signal would be picked up by someone in Kent, and he'd also take a fix on this, and it might be, say, in this direction, they say 75 degrees. And also a third picker up in Norwich in Norfolk here, and he would go down, and maybe it's down there. And in theory, these three lines should cross at a point. Usually there was a little margin of error, so you get a little triangle, and you know the aircraft is probably in that triangle. This took them a minute or so, and so they were able to go back to the pilot and say, OK, we reckon you're just east of Margate, and if you fly due west, you'll get to Croydon maybe in an hour or so. You should be there in time for tea.
By the end of the Second World War, aircraft had got bigger and heavier, and because there was no room for expansion, this was the beginning of the end for Croydon International.
Sadly, none of the big aircraft that flew out of Croydon carry passengers anymore, but there is one smaller one, and they tell me that it's airworthy. This is Barry Hughes, and this, I think, is a Dragon, de Havilland Dragon Rapide, is that right?
De Havilland Dragon Rapide, yes.
So, did these things fly out of Croydon?
These aircraft were traditionally built as a passenger aircraft, and yes, they first saw life out of Croydon. They'd done such routes as trips over towards Paris. They'd also do more local routes to the Channel Islands.
And who would have flown?
Normal members of the public, probably slightly more affluent at the time, that
rich. Rich, yes.
To travel the world and see the sights of Europe.
I guess if you wanted to hop over to Paris for the weekend, you must have been rich, mustn't you?
Yes, at the time.
Anyway, now, can you really take me up in this?
Yeah, it's no problem at all. I've been flying the aircraft for about 7 years now.
Ah, all right, good, good. How old is it?
The aircraft was built in 1943, so it's just
43?
1943.
That's the year I was born in. Well, I hope it's not feeling as old as I am. OK, so do I just climb in here?
Yeah, if you just climb in, and if you'd like to take a seat behind me, the pilot's cockpit at the very front of the aircraft.
I thought I should have a go myself and see what it was like for those affluent globetrotters of the 30s.
Ah, here we go. Take off. This is the scary bit.
The very last plane to fly out of Croydon Airport took off on the 30th of September 1959. really nice. It's very comfortable, very smooth, no bumping, less frightening than I expected. It may have been the rise of Gatwick and Stansted during the war that weakened Croydon as a viable airport, but the real nail in the coffin was to come from the small West London villages of Perry Oaks and Heathrow. Airports and the aviation industry have not only affected the economy, the culture and the global standing of London, they've also helped to shape the landscape of the capital. In 1944, the government studied the needs of post-war civil aviation and found the existing facilities were somewhat lacking. The land surrounding a small aerodrome based in the hamlet of Heathrow was laid with enough concrete to build a road from London to Edinburgh, as Britain's largest ever engineering project became the new London Airport.
This proving flight starts off from Heathrow, which will be the future civil airport of London. And it takes off from the finest runway in the world.
Once the Second World War was over, a master plan was developed to build terminals and an air traffic control tower, although construction didn't actually start until 1951. However, the technical advances in the aircraft during the Second World War led to some important milestones in commercial passenger aircraft. The jet age took off from Heathrow in 1952, when the world's first turbojet, the British-built de Havilland Comet 1, flew from Heathrow on a scheduled flight to Johannesburg. The Comet was a huge leap forward in technology. Never before had a passenger aircraft been designed to fly so high and so fast. And the engineers who designed and built it were wrestling with new materials, new concepts, new production methods, and they didn't even have computers. Fantastic. The future of the British air industry looked bright, and BOAC, who operated and maintained the Comets from Heathrow, were viewed as a seriously cutting-edge airline. But it was not to last. The fantastic success of the Comet came to an end after 2 devastating crashes. I met Chris Giles to find out what happened. What went wrong with Comet 1?
Well, what happened was, in the early days, the knowledge about materials and fatigue wasn't known. So the stresses on certain components, like the rivets here.
So it was the rivets?
What would happen is a rivet hole has a high stress area, and after the fatigue, the cracks would propagate from the holes of the rivets out to the next weakest point and then just carry on, and the pressure of the aircraft would open it up like a tin can, really.
So it just sort of unzipped and then exploded. Terrifying. In a way, it's a pity being the pioneer, isn't it? Because if you make mistakes, it's much harder to remedy and you suffer all the consequences. A major aspect of air safety is pilot training. And in August 1953, BOAC started training pilots on the ground using a brand new flight simulator. At Heathrow today, it's got a lot more advanced. This is a state-of-the-art simulator. You can see the whole thing's moving around like mad. It's sitting on 6 hydraulic legs, which can move the whole thing in any direction. So they can go up to take off, down to land, bank, and all this sort of thing. They feel all the G-forces you'd feel when you're flying the real aircraft. It is wonderful to have 6 tons of machinery being tossed around like a toy. Clear for takeoff. 1, 2, 3, go! Oh. Oh, I've broken it now. Sadly, I'm not allowed to take off, even though it isn't the real thing. But it's impressive, this 3D believability. The amazing effect is created by wraparound projection in front of the windows. But at Heathrow today, they're preparing staff for one of the biggest changes the airport has ever seen, using an even bigger 360 degrees projection simulator. Wow, this is it. This is fantastic. This is an exact model, full life size, of the new VCR, as they call it, the Visual Control Room, on the new control tower. And if you look, there's a panoramic view of the entire airport, and there are planes sort of taxiing about and landing and taking off. Sorry, hello Dale, I didn't see you there in the darkness. So this is what you come and play games with, is it's like having a computer game.
It's not quite the same. This is what the controllers use to train for the different perspective for the new control tower.
What do they do now to control the planes?
At the moment, we still use the old paper strips.
Oh, just like at Croydon.
3179, clear takeoff 27 left, surface wind is 28012.
That's amazing. So it literally is a piece of paper stuck in a piece of plastic. You're still using this stuff from sort of 50 years ago.
Very, very simple. The orange holder for the inbound airplane.
Oh, and blue for the...
Blue for the outbound.
Takeoff.
That's
OK,
right.
smashing. Well, what about the new one? The new stuff, is that going to be easy?
It'll be just the same. It won't be any easier or more difficult.
Right.
We will have electronic flight progress strips, which will make sharing of information a lot simpler.
OK. Oh, can I put the headphones on?
Better had.
Good. So what we've got here is a replica of that old paper strip.
That's right. And by touching on the screen, it replicates the movements that we do with the old strips in the old control tower.
How amazing. I mean, I would have thought you'd have some sort of fancy new thing. You're just replicating the old, you know, Stone Age
It's a tried
stuff.
and tested method.
Yes, OK. Speedbird 125, line up, runway 27 left.
So you can see the aircraft is pointing down the runway.
Oh, yes. Speedbird 125, cleared for takeoff, runway 27 left. Oh, he's going.
He's rolling.
There, he's off. Hooray! I got a plane into the air. I wonder if he ever got anywhere. This is the Visual Control Room, or VCR, of the new control tower. It was built off-site so as to reduce disruption of the airport operations. Late at night, while the airport was not being used, the 900-ton structure was wheeled into place and carefully positioned over its foundation. The VCR was winched up in stages, allowing sections of steel tower to be inserted underneath, until, after 12 long weeks, it reached its full height of 87 metres. The completed control tower was then lowered onto its permanent foundation next to Terminal 3 and surrounded by aircraft stands and taxiways, right at the heart of Heathrow Airport. And this is it. This is the new Visual Control Room, the new control tower, built by the Richard Rogers Partnership, who also built the Pompidou Centre in France and the Lloyd's building in London. Oh yes, and the Millennium Dome. And it's 87 metres high, nearly twice as high as Nelson's Column. With the result, you get the most fantastic view from here. It's huge, great big windows you can see around the entire airport. And if you look here, there's a plane just taking off. It's Kenya Airways. It's off to Nairobi. Wow. It looks much too heavy to get into the air. The great thing about being this high is that for the first time ever, I've got a really good view of how the airport works. I've got a map now. Because if you look, there are two runways. There's one over there and there's one over there, parallel. OK? And the left-hand one is used for landings. There's a plane actually landing as we speak. And the right-hand one is used for taking off. And there's a plane beginning its takeoff run as we speak. Between the two runways is the central terminal area here. That's terminals 1, 2 and 3. They're all clustered together. Terminal 1 over on the left, Terminal 2 at the far side, and Terminal 3 this side, with all these planes on their stands. And you see signs saying Terminal 1, Terminal 2, but they might as well all be the same building almost. They're not quite. Over there is Terminal 4, the other side of the takeoff runway, and miles away by road. And then, round here, we have the new terminal, Terminal 5, which will be coming into operation early in 2008. And that is absolutely enormous. And almost all the British Airways flights and a few others will move there, and that will greatly increase the capacity. Now, The number of movements, that's takeoffs and landings, is capped at 480,000 a year. That's the maximum that's allowed. And the number of passengers handled at the moment by Heathrow is 68 million. That's the same as the population of Britain. Extraordinary, the whole lot flying out or in every year. But with Terminal 5, the capacity for passengers is going to increase by 30 million. That's by nearly 50%.
So, why build another terminal for more passengers if there aren't going to be any extra planes? Well, the answer is because of this, the Airbus A380. This was the very first one to land at Heathrow in May 2006. It carries at least 550 passengers. That's 300 more than a standard plane and 150 more than the already huge jumbos. Will extra passenger capacity be the way forward for air travel, rather than the high speeds of Concorde or the spacious luxury of the early passenger aircraft? Who knows what the future will hold? Airports make London one of the world's leading cities. They're a vital economic force, generating £5 billion every year, and there's little doubt that their economic importance will continue to expand. But they're not universally popular. Airports have always generated opposition from people who live close to them, and there's no doubt at all that aircraft are noisy, polluting beasts. So the future expansion of London airports is bound to be controversial. London is home to architecturally stunning churches and cathedrals, and its places of worship are extraordinarily diverse, which is fitting for this most multicultural of world capitals. Over the centuries, many churches have been lost to fire and to war, but London still retains a wealth of religious sites renowned for their beauty and for their historical importance. Westminster Abbey is an architectural masterpiece which lies at the heart of English history. Thousands of people visit the Abbey every day to see the monuments, the memorials, Poets' Corner, and the tomb of the unknown warrior. A monastery was established here in the 10th century. But it was really Edward the Confessor in the 11th century who rebuilt the monastery and built a substantial church on the site. Unfortunately, this, the east range of the cloisters, is the only bit of Edward's building that remains. His church was finished in December 1065, just 8 days before he died, and when William the Conqueror turned up, he used it for his own coronation. And the Abbey has been the setting for every monarch's coronation ever since. Edward's 11th century church was rebuilt 200 years later by Henry III, and various bits have been added over the centuries, including the famous towers, completed in 1745. One man who knows all about the Abbey is the consultant archaeologist Warwick Rodwell. Warwick, tell me about this floor, which we're not allowed to walk on, are we?
No, this is one of the greatest treasures of the Abbey. It was laid in 1268, and it is a remarkable mosaic of a type which is extremely rare in the Middle Ages, and it comes originally from Italy, the design and the style, and it was laid at the behest of King Henry III.
So is there a name for this general style?
Yes, it's a mosaic work which we call cosmati work. Cosmati was an Italian family that specialised in laying this sort of work in the Middle Ages.
This intricate mosaic is made up of incredibly rare precious stones which can't be found in Britain.
This red porphyry only occurs in Egypt, and the beds are now gone. What happened, of course, is that in the Roman period, all this was used for great imperial buildings. Then in the Middle Ages, we and others went and looted them of their stone. And so this red stone has already done duty in a Roman building somewhere in the Mediterranean.
Right.
And it was then removed by salvage contractors in the 13th century, who sold it to Henry III, who brought it here and used it in the pavement.
Do you think the Italians are going to want it back?
I think they sold it, probably. But we may not have the receipt any longer.
Wow. So, Warwick, where are we now?
We're at the far east end of the Abbey, beyond the high altar, in what is known as the Chapel of Henry VII, or the Lady Chapel.
OK, and it's obviously a rather nice space, but is there anything special about it?
It's a magnificent space, but the greatest glory of it is if we look up and see what we have above us, the ceiling.
Fantastic.
This is known as a fan vault. This is a stone vault of the most intricate and complex kind ever built.
Wow, that is truly amazing. But this was the early 1500s, yes?
Yes, built in the first few years of the 1500s.
How on earth did they do it?
It's a very complex structure. An awful lot of scaffolding and woodwork was required, and you can best see how it's put together by going up on top and looking at the upper side of the vault.
Can we do that?
We can do that.
Let's go. So we've come up about 5,000 steps on a very narrow stone spiral staircase. Warwick, where are we now?
We're on top of the vault of Henry VII's chapel.
You mean on top of that beautiful ceiling?
We are standing on top of that wonderful carved ceiling with those great pendant bosses and all that detail.
But there's something holding us up, not just the ceiling.
No, it just holds itself up.
Yeah, are we going to fall through?
Well, I hope not. It's been here for quite a while.
Are you sure there's nothing underneath?
All that's underneath is the floor 70 feet below us.
Can we see through?
We can see through, yes. There happens to be a little spy hole here, and you can look through.
There are people. There are people down there directly under. Oh, God, we mustn't drop anything through, must we?
No, you can also see, look how thin the vault is.
3 inches. I'm getting back on. This is thicker here, isn't it?
That's thicker, yes. It's only 3 inches thick there. It's nowhere more than 4 inches thick, the webs of the vault. It had to be kept very light, otherwise the weight would have pushed the walls out.
The ceiling is supported by a hidden arch. The keystone is both part of the arch and part of the structure. The other stones are cut precisely to fit together, and once the keystone is dropped in, the entire structure is locked in place and becomes self-supporting. If you took the keystone out, the entire ceiling would collapse.
This is truly amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
No, and you won't, because it is unique. It is something that was very cleverly designed, and it was described in 1542 as the wonder of the entire world.
Westminster Abbey has survived for over 700 years, but many other medieval churches were destroyed in the Great Fire of 1666. After the fire, the brilliant Christopher Wren built 52 new churches, and his legacy still helps to define the skyline of London.
This is St Stephen Walbrook, which was Christopher Wren's own local parish church. He lived just round the corner. Now, it looks rather dull on the outside, but inside he took tremendous trouble over the construction.
St Stephen Walbrook, in the heart of the city, is also famous as the birthplace of the Samaritans. In 1953, the rector, Dr. Chad Varra, began the famous helpline from this church, and the original phone is still there.
What I most love about this church is that it is so beautiful. There are some modern features like this circular altar installed by Henry Moore in 1987, but just look at the great wide open space, these magnificent pillars, and above all, the fantastic dome.
Wren's friend and contemporary, Dr. Robert Hooke, had, in 1675, come up with a theory of how to construct the perfect dome.
And this was how he did it. He took a chain, and he showed that if you hung it between 2 points, it always hangs in a particular shape called a catenary, which gives the same tension all the way along the chain. Hooke's brilliant idea was that if you turn this upside down, there we are, then you'd have the perfect shape for an arch, because you'd have the same compression all the way along the arch. And if you then just imagine turning this through a vertical axis, then you would have a dome.
Hooke's secular science enabled Wren to create beautiful spiritual architecture, best seen in his most famous masterpiece, St Paul's Cathedral.
whose iconic dome still dominates London today. Wren produced several designs for St Paul's, all of which featured some kind of dome. This is the Great Model. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it? It's been around for 300 years. This was, in fact, Wren's second complete design for St Paul's Cathedral. It was his favourite design, and when it was rejected, it must have been one of the great disappointments of his career. Gordon, do you think he was addicted to circular spaces?
Well, I think he was obsessed by the idea of a dome. He'd been to Paris in 1665 to escape the plague and had seen a number of new dome churches there. And as soon as he came back to England, he proposed a tall dome in place of the tower on the medieval cathedral just before the cathedral was burnt down in the Great Fire. And then in several designs after the fire, he proposed a central crossing dome. This is the largest proposal, the largest design. And the dome he proposes here is actually bigger than the one he eventually built. It's nearly as big as the dome of St. Peter's in Rome.
The dome that was built produced an accidental acoustic phenomenon which gives the interior gallery its name. This is the Whispering Gallery. There are fabulous views both of the floor of the cathedral and the dome above. But I want to find out whether you really can talk around the outside. So I've asked Gordon to go exactly across the other side. Gordon, you haven't got a microphone, have you?
No, I haven't.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well, Adam.
Did Wren plan this extraordinary effect?
No, I don't think he did. He sloped this wall in for structural reasons, although the outside columns are vertical, and it's had the effect of capturing the sound as it runs around the interior.
Can you really whisper?
Yes, you can. You can hear a whisper all the way round.
It is amazing, isn't it? It really is a whispering gallery.
Yes.
That's amazing. I've never been up here before, and I've always heard that when other people come, there are hundreds of people and you can't hear a thing, but with just two of us, it's a doddle. Okay, time for a pint. Wren was fascinated with religious buildings and once remarked that for him, architecture aims at eternity. St Paul's has certainly survived the centuries, even through London's second Great Fire, the Blitz of World War II. But many other churches were not so lucky. Tourists from around the world flock into London every year to see its famous churches, especially those designed by Sir Christopher Wren. Sadly, the Blitz destroyed many of them, including St Mary Le Bow on Cheapside, which was hit by German bombs on the 10th of May 1941. The external walls of the church survived, as did the steeple. At 239.5 feet, it was Wren's grandest, and probably was the reason why St Mary Le Bow was the costliest of the new city churches. And it has another famous feature. These are the Bow bells, arguably the most famous bells in London. In medieval times there was just one, a curfew bell, but now there are 12. And that one in the middle there, that is the Great Bell of Bow. It weighs more than 2,000 kilograms, 2 tons. These bells famously rang Dick Whittington back into London, and he became Lord Mayor several times. When there wasn't any traffic, you could hear these bells 3 or 4 miles away in Hackney Marshes. And indeed, anyone who is born within the sound of Bow bells is a true Cockney. Today, the bells are rung every week by a group of bell ringers who work in the city. Do you think I could have a go?
Come and try it.
Are you sure?
It's more difficult than it looks, but we're just introducing you slowly to it.
I hope so.
So nice and relaxed, and we're going to start.
OK.
Look 2.
Tell me when to pull.
Your hands will be taken up by the rope.
They will?
And then a nice
Am I going to be taken up by the rope?
I hope not.
Right.
Look 2. Trouble's going. She's gone.
London's church bells have called people to worship for hundreds of years. Over time, Christian churches have been joined by religious buildings of many different faiths. To begin with, many of those worshippers practiced in secret because of religious intolerance. No wonder then that some of London's places of worship are hidden away.
This street goes by the curious name of Bevis Marks, and just a few yards off it is this synagogue, the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, built in 1701. The reason it's discreetly tucked away is that Jews were not then allowed to build on the main thoroughfares. This synagogue is the oldest in Europe that is still in continuous use today.
Today, the synagogue is still hidden away, dwarfed by modern office buildings.
The really special thing about this synagogue is that it's hardly changed at all in 300 years. Some people say that's because it's so hard to find. The architect was a master builder called Joseph Avis, who was a friend and contemporary of Robert Hooke and Christopher Wren. Indeed, they all worked on the same buildings, which is probably why this looks so much like a lot of those Wren churches, notably St. Stephen Walbrook. It's a wonderful big open space with lots of light and wonderful columns, in this case holding up the gallery.
This interior remains beautiful after hundreds of years, but these pews are even older, survivors from the congregation's first synagogue, founded in 1656 in nearby Creechurch Lane.
This is the reading platform, the tavern, from where the service is conducted. And a major part of the service is the reading of the law, the Torah, from the scrolls, wonderful scrolls which are kept in the ark, down there at the focal point of the synagogue, beautifully decorated with the 10 Commandments in Hebrew above them.
Bevis Marks Synagogue is on the border between the City of London and the East End, which was the original home of the Jewish population. Indeed, you can still see signs on some of the buildings. The East End of London has seen successive waves of immigration, and this is reflected in the religious buildings there.
This building here on the corner of Brick Lane was actually built in 1743 as a Protestant church for the Huguenots who were running away from religious persecution in France. Then in 1898 it changed to become a synagogue for all the Jews, and in 1976 it changed again to become a mosque for all the people from Bangladesh who now live in the area, which just goes to show how the changes in a place of worship tell you something about the evolution of the area.
And the very number of churches in an area can also tell us about how London was growing. Victorian London saw an explosion in population, and so new churches were built by the hundred, leaving London a legacy of grand 19th century buildings. When Roman Catholics were allowed to build their own churches, they put up such spectacular buildings as the Brompton Oratory and Westminster Cathedral. These churches are ornate and highly decorated inside, rather like churches from the Orthodox Eastern tradition of Christianity. Here in Chiswick is the UK's first purpose-built Russian Orthodox church. The dazzling interior of the crypt follows the tradition of rich and abundant decoration. Work began on the church 10 years ago, and its traditional Eastern Russian exterior was finished early on in the project. However, above the crypt, in the main body of the church, the builders are still hard at work, but they seem to have left some curious holes in the wall. I asked Douglas Norwood, the architect, to explain.
Douglas, I've noticed that there are a lot of holes in the walls, like sort of pigeonholes. Are they a mistake?
No, that's not a mistake. The plasters would like us to think it's a mistake because they would like to fill them in. But they are the elements of a resonator.
Resonators? Is that for the music?
It's because the Russian Orthodox Church has these large screens in front of the sanctuary, which is called an iconostasis. And the priest, a lot of the time, is behind that screen. And unless we can control the acoustics very well in the building, the congregation can't hear what he's saying.
But they didn't have breeze blocks in Russia, so what did they use?
Clay water pots.
Oh, really?
Which were bedded on their sides, in the thickness of the wall.
With the mouth sticking out?
With the mouth sticking out, yes.
Oh, wonderful. So it's a bit like blowing over the top of a milk bottle.
Exactly the same thing. That's the effect that you have.
It's amazing that this old technology is being used again in this modern context. But to create the church's most crucial and traditional element, they've used the very latest technology. This dome has sat on top of the church right next to the busy M4 for 10 years, but its striking blue colour looks brand new. And that's because the tiles are coated with an enamel that amazingly sheds molecules to clean itself. As Wren used Hooke's mathematical formulae, today traditional Russian domes are made using space-age technology. Immigration has meant that traditional architectural forms from around the world have been recreated here in modern London. But perhaps none is quite as surprising as this little piece of Thailand in the middle of leafy Wimbledon. This is the Wat Buddha Padipa, a Thai Buddhist temple, and in fact is the only Thai temple built in Europe. The temple was designed with a traditional Thai roof known as a Jaturamukh and was begun in 1979.
The most amazing thing about this temple is the decoration inside. And one of the chaps who did it was Pang. Pang, how long did it take to decorate this temple?
We started in 1984 and finished by 1992.
Right, 8 years.
Yes.
Long time. And how many painters did this?
25 altogether.
Really? All from Thailand?
All from the Fine Art University.
Oh, tell me about the painting up on that wall.
We have to introduce the people to the story of the Buddha,
right.
Starting from the birth of Buddha, which is that one.
Right.
And then following by renunciation, when he decided to live the worldly life.
Right.
Searching for enlightenment, which is that one. And then the rest of his life over there is when he passed away. You can see the big picture there.
Right.
Passing away. And also start teaching.
Right, I see. Okay. But now tell me, you have Margaret Thatcher here and George Bush and Superman. This is not traditional Thai.
It is not, but it's interesting that we started painting when Mrs. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister.
Thai temple murals traditionally feature figures and scenes from everyday life, but I was amazed to see so many Western icons painted in a modern style. A wonderful mix of ancient East meeting modern West.
As London becomes ever more multicultural, places of worship are being built in an ever-increasing variety of styles. Many of them following traditional designs, but constructed using modern materials and methods. 300 years ago, after the Great Fire, Christopher Wren built 52 churches, essentially defining the City of London. But even in today's much more secular age, there are still parts of this city that are being built for faith.
London is an internationally renowned shopping centre. There are tens of thousands of shops spread out throughout the city. In fact, it's not a surprise at all because it's been an important trading centre since Roman times. Building Londinium on a major river meant the Romans could import goods from all over the known world. Later, in medieval times, the city of London was built up on the site of Londinium, and it's here we can see evidence of the capital's earliest trading.
This is Leadenhall Market, one of London's oldest shopping centres. In fact, there's been a market here for 600 years for the sale of meat, fish, poultry and corn. This iron and glass building is Victorian. It was put up in 1881, but for medieval Londoners, the market was the principal source of goods. Traders often set up stalls in the houses around the market and in the nearby streets, and these were the very first shops. Many of them were open-fronted, like this wonderful fish shop here. Because the city was the heart of London, all the major markets were found here. This meant that the earliest shops were based here too, and we can see this in the street names today. The Great Fire of London in 1666 destroyed some of the city markets, and that, plus a move west by respectable society, meant that new markets were needed outside the city. The most famous, and the largest in England, was Covent Garden. By the 1950s, this was a busy fruit, flower and vegetable market. But back in the 17th century, when the area was first developed, there wasn't a market planned at all. In 1630, Covent Garden became the site of London's first experiment in town planning, because the 4th Earl of Bedford commissioned Inigo Jones to design a square suitable for gentlemen to live in. Now, Inigo Jones had been to Italy, and it's almost certain that this square was based on an Italian piazza. It was unique in 17th century London and was very much copied. Unfortunately, none of those original 17th century houses survives to this day, but nevertheless, the place where they were built defines the shape of Covent Garden. Canny market traders saw the opportunity and moved in, setting up stalls in the square. Over there was Bedford House, the Earl's residence, with the back garden behind it, and it was there around 1650 that the first unofficial traders set up. Within 20 years, there were so many of them that the Earl applied for a licence to try and regulate the situation, but still the market kept on growing. Because of the rapidly growing market, the gentry moved out and writers, artists and actors moved in. Covent Garden became an entertainment area with theatres and coffee houses. With all the market stalls as well, the place was chaotic. So in 1830, the Duke of Bedford commissioned the market buildings. They were glassed over 40 years later to create more space for trading. The market dominated Covent Garden right up to the 1970s, when it was finally moved away to Vauxhall, and the market buildings were successfully redeveloped into a tourist shopping destination. Over the years, with so many people coming to the market, it's no surprise that many retailers set up shop in the streets around it. In 1869, one of our largest grocery chains actually started at 173 Drury Lane. Enterprising shopkeepers have always set up in places where people could reach them easily, near markets, on busy thoroughfares, or just near important buildings. And that's why St James's was such a prime location. The shops of St James's have traditionally been associated with luxury, wealth and exclusivity. And this all started because retailers came to be near the court, which had moved to St James's Palace in 1698. And remarkably, one of those shops is still trading today, the wine merchants, Berry Brothers and Rudd. The shop was first opened as a grocery store by the widow Bourne in the 1690s. In the 1730s, the shop was rebuilt by Widow Bourne's son-in-law, William Pickering, and it's more or less now as it was then. If he came in here now, he'd recognise the place, with a wonderful uneven wooden floor. Look at this. And outside, it's almost the same as it was then in the 18th century. Really remarkable. It was still a grocer's shop, and so this huge set of scales here is called the coffee mill, and they weighed not only the coffee, but also people, like this. Oh, thank goodness I'm not quite that heavy. From 1765, it became a fashionable pastime for the great and the good to come and get themselves weighed. And what's rather entertaining is that they wrote all the weights down in great ledgers. So here we have His Royal Highness the Duke of Cambridge, 1516 stone. He was quite well fed. Here we have Lord Byron, measured with boots but no hat on. I wonder what clothes he was wearing. The Berry family got into the business in the late 1700s, and Mr. Hugh Rudd joined in 1918. But it's really the Berrys who run it, and they've been running it for generations. And Simon Berry, you're the
Well, I'm the 7th generation.
7th generation.
Yes.
Now, going back to the early days, how did they keep the wine then?
Well, wine was kept entirely in barrel in those days, and bottles were really only used as decanters to take it from the barrel to the glass.
So do you mean that people had their own bottles?
They had their own bottles, mainly because the thing you have to remember is that no matter how expensive the wine was in those days, the bottle was always more valuable. Glass was such an expensive commodity that no bottles until about the mid-19th century had their own labels on them saying what the wine was. What they had was medallions which had the name of the person, the customer, who owned the bottle.
No.
Absolutely. And it didn't matter, even if you had a very embarrassing name. We've got here a bottle which dates from 1753, and the owner of the bottle proudly put his name on it, despite the fact his name is Mr. Bastard.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. So are there a lot of these about?
The Bastard family were great drinkers.
Right.
And obviously extremely rich, and so they had a huge amount of bottles named with their name on them. And in fact, any bottle this shape is now referred to in the trade as a Bastard bottle.
This is the barrel lift. This is how they used to get all the wine from their cellars up to street level. And this, of course, is St James's Street. This is the fashionable heart of Regency London. And it was actually the Regency beau monde, the beautiful people at the apex of society, who brought about the next change in shopping history. By 1800, London was the largest city in Europe. It was well on its way to having 2 million inhabitants. Demand for all manner of merchandise, from household goods to the most luxurious wares, flourished, and so the number of shops increased to meet the demand. The consumer revolution had begun. Just like today, one of Regency London's favourite pastimes was shopping. And one of the greatest shopaholics of the whole of the Regency period was this chap, Beau Brummell. He was incredibly vain, a great dandy. It's said that he took 5 hours to get dressed every morning because he wanted everything to be perfect. He loved elaborate neckwear, and he may even have invented the idea of wearing a tie with a suit. The thing was about those Regency dandies, they loved not only shopping, but they loved promenading, going out to see and be seen. And as a result of that, they changed the face of shopping architecture. The love of the promenade led to the arcade. This, the Burlington Arcade, was built in 1818 and at 585 feet is the longest in Britain. The arcade was actually a French idea, but it quickly came over to England probably because of our rotten weather. It was actually brought here by Lord George Cavendish, who'd been to Paris, and there he saw the Passage des Panoramas, and he realised it was a great financial success and thought it might work here. There's another story that he was fed up with people coming out of the gin and oyster bars and chucking all the remains over his garden wall, and the smell was absolutely disgusting. And yet another theory is that his wife demanded somewhere where she could go shopping with her friends in peace and quiet and not have to mix, with the riffraff. Hello.
So have we done carrying of parcels in the arcade?
Sorry, who are you?
I'm the beadle of the Burlington Arcade.
The beadle? So you're the boss?
I am, sir.
So, sorry, why aren't I allowed to carry a parcel?
It's just deemed ungentlemanlike, sir. So originally...
are you suggesting I'm not a gentleman?
I wouldn't dream of such a thing, sir. I wouldn't dream of such a
Right. So, what other funny rules are there?
Originally in the arcade, you weren't allowed to whistle because the pickpockets used to whistle to each other. In fact, there's only one individual we allowed to whistle, which is Sir Paul McCartney.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, is it okay this time if I take my parcel out?
It is indeed, sir. Yes.
Okay, well, I think I better scarper. Okay. Thanks very much indeed.
You're welcome, sir.
Cheers.
Good night.
Burlington Arcade really is a beautiful place to come and browse. And windows are obviously a crucial part of shop architecture because they lure passers-by inside. It was in the mid-18th century that glass first started to be used in shop windows. But without modern manufacturing techniques, how on earth did they make window panes? London's busy retail streets are packed with window shoppers. But up until the 18th century, most shops would have been open-fronted like stalls because window glass was so expensive. This shop here is one of the oldest surviving bow-fronted shops in London, built in 1754. It was originally a tobacconist, Freiburg and Treyer, and you'll notice that all the panes of glass are very small. Come over and have a look. Look at this pane of glass here. It's very wobbly and uneven. If I move about, I'm sort of distorted all over the place, and that's because it was handmade. How did they make the glass for those windows? Well, actually, what they were making was bits like this. And Lane here is going to try and show me how to make one. Wish me luck. The process for making crown glass was perfected by the French in the 14th century, but they kept it a secret for 300 years. Now that's what, over 1,000 degrees, I guess, is it?
That's right, 11
Right. Because the glass is blown into a hollow globe called a crown, the glass becomes thinner and clearer, and of much better quality than earlier methods produced. Lane let me have a go at blowing.
When you blow, just blow gently and steady. Bring this up to your mouth and keep it turning all times.
It's much harder than it looks. The next stage is to attach another hot iron.
Yeah, it's great. Right.
Right. Ah! I've broken it. Is that all right?
That's what you're meant to do.
Oh, good. What are you doing now?
Opening the hole up in the shape.
OK, that was where we blew the air in originally.
That's right, yeah. So we're making it a little bit larger.
So it's now roughly all the same thickness apart from the very centre.
That's right.
To create the flat disc, the secret is to spin the glass. OK, we're going to spin like mad. It's going slowly. Yeah! OK, stop spinning.
You stop spinning now, that won't move anymore.
Really?
Stop moving.
To make those 18th century windows, they must have spun the glass to 3 times this size and then cut it into a grid to create the window panes. Thanks. New technology in glass production around the 1840s meant that shops could have much larger windows, which were used to display the increasingly wide range of goods that were being imported from Britain's vast Victorian empire. Then came mass production. Small shops, like grocers and drapers, began to expand the range of goods on offer. And some grew into the familiar department stores we know today. Perhaps the most famous of these, and probably the most famous shop in the world, is Harrods. Harrods is the largest store in London. It covers an astounding 4.5 acres. But it hasn't always been quite so magnificent. This department here, it's full of handbags and stuff, and it's known as the Room of Luxury. And what's really interesting about it is this ceiling. Look at this wonderful moulded plaster ceiling with all sorts of goddesses and cherubs and things. Now that ceiling is about the same size as the original Harrods shop, and indeed it's in about the same place. So this was the original Harrods shop. It's absolutely tiny. Harrods' fortunes were changed dramatically in 1889 with the appointment of a new general manager, Richard Burbage. He had a vision of a grand store covering a whole block. Building work started in 1901 and took 4 years to complete.
Telegraphic address, Harrods, Everything, London. The most interesting and beautiful store in the whole of Britain and one of the most famous in the world.
And over the years, almost everything has been for sale at Harrods. A.A. Milne purchased the teddy bear that became Winnie the Pooh, and Alfred Hitchcock had fresh herrings flown to him in Hollywood. And I'm told that Ronald Reagan even ordered a baby elephant from here. He called it Gertie. It's just as well they've got space. We're now 7 floors below the street behind Harrods. This is where they bring all the stuff in, they take it through on these forklift trucks, and then take it up in lifts up to the store above. What a fantastic place. I want to drive one. Burbage lured customers in with a more familiar mode of transport. England's first escalator in 1898. The current owner, Mohammed Al Fayed, also wanted to treat his customers to a spectacle. So in 1997, he spent an astonishing £20 million to build this fantastic Egyptian escalator. No prizes for guessing where the Egyptian theme comes from. I met Bill Mitchell, who designed the escalator. These pillars, are these solid stone?
No. No, it's sand and cement.
Sand and cement?
Sand and cement. 1 part cement.
Right.
4 parts sand.
Just like you have on semis in Bermondsey?
Absolutely.
Right, right.
The columns are hollow and they actually carry the air conditioning.
No. Now look, I want to know about these panels here, because there are a lot of these.
Yes.
Are these are sand and cement too, are they?
Yes.
Well, tell me, how did they get made? You must have skilled stonemasons doing this.
No, I did these. I carved these myself.
You carved these yourself?
Yeah,
there are hundreds of them.
There are. There's about 270.
Go on, tell me how you did it.
Well, you put your sand and cement on the wall whilst it's wet.
Yes.
You do a drawing in charcoal.
Right.
You pick it up and you put it against the panel.
Right.
And you rub it.
Right.
Then you peel it off slowly.
Right.
And it leaves
a transfer, in fact.
As a transfer.
Okay.
Then you put your hand in your pocket.
Right.
And you bring out your knife.
Oh! A dangerous weapon.
A dangerous weapon. And you start to carve it.
So this is just a letter opener?
That's all.
And you carved all these panels with that?
All of that, yeah.
That's amazing. This escalator is totally over the top, but you've got to admire the showmanship behind it. Harrods had an arch rival in Selfridges, the other famous London department store, equally renowned for showmanship and display. Selfridges' window displays weren't just about merchandising, they were about theatre and spectacle. The chap behind Selfridges, Mr. Gordon Selfridge from Chicago, was really a sort of showman, a Barnum and Bailey character. Now, most big London stores started as just a small shop, but this place was designed from the outset to be a vast department store. Gordon Selfridge wanted to create a retail palace. Building work began on the store in 1907, and it continued growing right up until the 1970s. I met Eric Parry, an architect who's working on the restoration of the exterior of Selfridges. Tell me about how this extraordinary place was built.
It actually, in its building, changed the regulations because it's the first building, not the first steel frame building. The Ritz was the first steel frame building in London in 1907. But this was the first steel frame building which then supported the stone that you see.
Did Gordon Selfridge always get his own way?
He had a vision for a huge central dome. And I think the top of that was going to be as tall, if not taller, than St. Paul's. So there was an extraordinary space, but it wasn't to be. His ambitions were curtailed.
Right. Tell me about the main entrance as it is now. There's the sort of fabulous sculpture over the door.
This 14-ton sculpture of the Queen of Time rides below the idea of commerce and the ship and the prow and a myriad of complex iconography that draws you in. So it is and still is this most extraordinarily crafted threshold to a different world, to a world of fantasy and display and theatre.
Under Selfridges, in the basements, is a warren of corridors. And the building's gone through so many changes, I don't think anyone knows what these various rooms were originally meant for. In fact, I'm not quite sure I'm going to find my way out again. The underground, that's the central line, runs very, very close to this building, and if you listen, you can quite often hear trains going past. There was a rumour, and I think it probably is only a rumour, that Gordon Selfridge had his own private underground station here. It's a wonderful thought, isn't it? And then there are these mysterious rooms here. You see that it's a sort of War Department number on the door. That's number 14 and number 13. And in fact, there was a secret American intelligence headquarters down here during the war. They had a super scrambling device. It was codenamed X-ray. And if Winston Churchill wanted to speak directly to the American president, he would get on the phone in the cabinet war rooms. There was a direct line underground to this place, the basement of Selfridges, and here they would scramble it to send the message across the Atlantic. Amazing. Up above was a spectacular roof garden with tea rooms and fashion shows. There was even a shooting range. This is what the roof looks like today, and sadly all the gardens have gone. Great empty flower pots. What the shoppers below didn't realise in those grand old days was that all the rock and the earth and the plants and the water up here weighed more than 2,000 tons. It's a terrifying thought that the roof might have given way at any moment. Wouldn't it be wonderful if during this restoration they could restore the roof as well and have beautiful gardens up here again? I think it's most unlikely that anyone will build a new department store as grandly as Selfridges. Retailers simply don't have that much money. But this fantastic frontage has lasted almost 100 years, and with luck, after the restoration, it'll be equally beautiful in another 100 years. Below me lies a city bustling with activity. But London's busy life poses a set of problems that its inhabitants have been trying to get to grips with since the very beginning. How do you find enough power to heat the homes and run the business? How do you get clean water in and waste out? If we hadn't solved those problems, London would never have flourished and become the great city that it is today. The Romans got most of their water from wells, and obviously they got a bit bored of pulling it up on buckets on strings, and so they built a machine to do it for them. And this is the Museum of London's reconstruction of a Roman water lifting machine. Now, in Roman times, they would have had slaves or animals to push this thing round, and I guess I'm one or the other, and it's quite hard work. But you'll see I'm turning this capstan, and that's turning a cog there, and that's turning another cog over my head, which is turning the shaft, and that's lifting these buckets on the left-hand side. They're oak buckets and iron pins and an iron chain. It's very remarkable because each bucket holds about 7 litres of water, and the well was about 5 metres deep. And this single system was enough to provide water for about 8,000 people every day. You can see I'm pumping quite a lot of water up over the top, and at the moment it's just running back down into the tank underneath. What's very cunning is that because the buckets are held on with pins, they could just take one of the pins out and put in an extra bucket, or take one out. In other words, lengthen or shorten the chain, which was important because if the water level in the well was low, they'd have to go down further to get it. And if the water level rose, they didn't want the buckets going too low into the water because they then begin to oscillate and it didn't work properly. Very important, they just skimmed the surface. And just look at that enormous amount of water that I'm lifting up. As well as building remarkable pieces of machinery like this, the Romans were also the first to use pipes to channel water to where it was needed. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the Brits stopped using pipes for their water. They relied on springs and streams and the river, of course. But by the beginning of the 13th century, the population was growing and they needed a better supply. In 1237, they built the Great Conduit, a system of pipes that brought water from the Tyburn stream 2 miles to the west of the city. Lead pipes took the water downhill via the Strand, across the Fleet River and along Cheapside to the Conduit House, where the water would be collected. In 1994, while BT were digging a service shaft, they found a medieval chamber that would have been directly below the Conduit House. I was invited down to take a look. Wow, that was quite a tight fit, but I'm now down here in this chamber. The beeping that's going on is telling us that we've still got some air to breathe, for which I'm very grateful. And this is Mark Birch, who's a senior archaeologist at the Museum of London. You actually dug this out, did you?
I did, yes.
Yes.
In summer of 1994.
Right, and we're not, what, about 10 feet down below street level?
About 3 metres down from street level.
Right, so it must have been quite a flow of water if it was going to fill a chamber like this.
Yes, it was gravity fed all the way,
right,
but it was coming down the slope all the way.
And did people sort of meet there for, you know, chats and stuff?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the Great Conduit, as this became known later in its life, was recorded as being somewhere where people would meet. It was in the Market Square area of Cheapside,
and people would congregate here. To supplement the supply they would have had from their wells, they would have come down here with jugs and pitchers and taken the water they needed for their daily use.
Oh, terrific. And so how long do you think this was in use?
Well, we know from records it was in use certainly up to the Great Fire in 1666.
Right, so that's 400 years.
It must have been, yes.
And it's fabulous construction, isn't it? I mean, it's in very good nick. Or it could do with a bit of repointing, couldn't it? But frankly, and that's just lime mortar holding it together, is it?
Yes, it's a lime mortar with plenty of aggregate in it. It's almost a concrete, bonding the green sandstone, bits of flint and tile.
Yeah, are those Roman tiles? It looks awfully like...
Yes, they actually are Roman tiles, but they would have found those lying around.
Lying around, yes.
In London.
That's so characteristic, aren't they, these thin tiles?
Yes.
More and more conduits were built, bringing fresh water into London. But the River Thames was still the main source, despite being rather less than pure. The process of slow sand filtering was first used by the Chelsea Water Company in 1829. They wanted to take water from the river, the Thames, and they realised it looked a bit like that, and clearly that's not fit to drink. So they developed a really simple system. And what they did was to take a filter bed like this, and they put in first big stones at the bottom. Next, they put gravel on top of the big stones. And then on top of the gravel, they put sand. And I'm just going to dump this on top like this. And I need more at my end over the hole, but I'll put some at the other end too. And then it needs to be patted down a bit. And so we've got 3 layers, and the water will go first through the sand, and then through the gravel, and then through the big stones. And the idea is that the sand should take out most, at least, of the big lumpy stuff on top. So I have a clean glass, which I'm going to put underneath, and the theory is that when I pour in this foul water with all that gunk in it, it should come out crystal clear and ready to drink. All the big rubbish has been taken out, and all we're getting through is some very, very fine sand. And once it's settled down, it should come out crystal clear. Now, what those early practitioners didn't realise was that it wasn't only physical filtering, there was also some biological filtering. Because on top there, you collect some bacteria known as the Schmutzdecke. And those bacteria are actually helping to clean up the water. In fact, it was so efficient that the same system is still being used today. There. Your health. Well, maybe later. In 1852, it became a legal requirement for all domestic water to pass through a filtration bed before use. These new filter beds were often accompanied by brand new pumping stations to pump water directly into homes after the filtration process. This pumping station is in Stoke Newington in northeast London. Its pumping equipment has long since gone, but the magnificent building still stands. The filter beds were across the road where those houses are now. And then, because this was a posh area, they didn't want to build an ugly great pumping station, so instead they built a Scottish castle. Isn't it wonderful? It all looks decorative, but actually it was all functional. The great big high tower in the middle was a chimney, the square one on the right was a water storage tank, and the pointy one on the left was actually a place to give access to the huge beam engines. Even those buttresses on the right-hand side, which look as if they're holding the building up, were actually space for the huge flywheels connected to the beam engines. Isn't it terrific? Cleaner water was coming into homes, but in the mid-19th century, as the flushing lavatory became more and more popular, wastewater became a problem, especially as it flowed directly into the Thames. Eventually, Parliament realised they had to do something about the sewage, and they gave the Metropolitan Board of Works £3 million, fantastic amount of money in those days, and told them to sort it out. Well, the chap in charge was Joseph Bazalgette, who was a wonderful man with an enormous luxuriant moustache, and he designed a great system of intercepting sewers, 3 to the north of the river and 3 to the south. And they all flowed from west to east, and they came together at Abbey Mills in the north and at Crossness in the south, which is where we are today. It was a vast undertaking, the biggest engineering project anywhere in the world at the time. Well, by the time the sewage came here, and it came all the way by gravity, just trickling downhill, it was way underground. And what they needed was to get it high enough that they could discharge it into the river at high tide, so it would be swept out by the outgoing tide. So here they built this great building with 4 huge beam engines to pump that sewage up. And one of those beam engines has been restored and it's running today.
It's now the largest surviving rotative beam engine in the world. The steam flows through the cylinders and the piston rods drive one end of a 42-foot long beam. The other end turns the 28-foot diameter, 50-ton flywheel. Plungers attached to the middle of the beams could pump up to 17 million gallons of sewage every day to Crossness's subterranean reservoir. From there, it flowed out to sea on the tide.
This building was opened on the 4th of April, 1865, by the Prince of Wales. But it wasn't just the Prince of Wales. There were 2 other princes, a duke, 2 archbishops, and the Lord Mayor of London. They were fantastically proud of this building, and once they'd started the engines, they went outside and had an enormous lunch. Which reminds me, it's about that sort of time now. Anyway, this was the biggest engineering project in the world, and 90 or even 95% of it was underground. Poor old Bazalgette, he'll never be famous like Christopher Wren. When he did come above ground, he made the most of it. And here he's built an absolute cathedral in cast iron. Look at this, hollow pillars. And then up above, terrific tops with leaves and fruit and goodness knows what. It's like a cathedral, it really is. And this place is only for pumping sewage. And then look at these terrific screens. You know, leaves and flowers and intertwined curly bits, and everywhere the symbol, the logo, if you like, of the Metropolitan Board of Works. This is a true monument to excrement. Before 1800, people used to light their homes using candles like this one here, or oil lamps like that one up there. And both these things work on the same principle, using a wick. One of the interesting things about the candle is that the solid wax won't burn. The only thing that burns is wax vapour. Let me show you. Can you see the flame jump? It'll jump back down to the wick from the taper. Because when you blow it out, what comes off is not smoke, but wax vapour. And the heat from the flame is melting the wax, turning it into liquid. The liquid goes soaking up the wick by capillary action, and when it gets hot, it turns into vapour, and that's what burns. And the same happens with the oil lamp. There's oil in the reservoir, it soaks up the wick, and it burns at the top. Now, both of these things are quite complicated. You have to go out and buy your candles, you have to go out and buy your oil, you have to scrape up the remains of the candle wax that drips off the side, and so on and so forth. So when gas began to be piped into people's homes, they were absolutely delighted. In this perfectly preserved Victorian house, they still have gas piped, so it comes out of the walls. And if you want a higher flame, you can turn it up, and a lower flame, you can turn it down. Isn't that wonderful? But then they wouldn't just have had a naked flame, they generally surrounded it with a glass chimney like this, partly because that helps to diffuse the light and it looks prettier, and partly because it helps to prevent the flame from blowing out in a draught. In Victorian times, in fact, that flame would have been a whole lot brighter.
Victorian gas was much dirtier because, unlike today's natural gas, it was made from coal. All that muck and dirt in the coal would make the gas burn with a much brighter, yellower flame. The gas was made right here in London and was known as town gas.
I'm going to try and make some here with the help of John Gibbons, who's a senior lecturer here at Imperial College. So, I'm going to take some coal and I'm going to put that in a kettle. And that should be plenty. And then I'm going to heat it on this burner. And in those days they used great big retorts to heat the gas for the whole town, and actually some of those were called kettles. And what happens is the heat breaks down the coal and you get gas coming off. The first report we have of coal gas comes from a chap called John Clayton, who was rector of Crofton Parish Church near Wakefield. In 1687 he made a trip over to Wigan and found a ditch wherein the water seemed to burn like brandy. and the heat whereof was so strong that several strangers were seen boiling eggs over it. Well, he dug down and he dug out some coal and he went home and heated it up and he got coal gas, which is what, look, we've got coming off our kettle now. Do you think that'll burn?
Well, let's give it a go. It'll burn soon, I think.
Not yet.
Not yet.
So basically what we've got coming off here is steam. This is water because all the coal was very wet. And as that boils off, so it'll bring with it the coal gas.
Yeah, when it goes green, it'll burn. I think it's still a bit clean yet.
Okay. Now, natural gas is just methane, but coal gas is a mixture of methane, carbon monoxide, hydrogen, and all sorts of other things, including sulfides, hydrogen sulfide and other sulfides. So it was very smelly and very poisonous. And the natural gas we have today is almost not smelly at all. They have to add some smell, so you notice if you've got a gas leak. Still just water coming off, I guess.
Well, it'll be the first volatiles don't burn very well. There's a lot of carbon dioxide comes first.
Right.
Then as it gets hotter, you get the tars and what they call the illuminants, the bit that makes
it's getting more interesting, isn't it? Yes, try that. There it goes. That is terrific. And all the yellow is a mixture of tar and the sulphury things, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the stuff that's looking sort of brown is some of the sulphur, but that's a pretty clean coal as well. They'd have used much worse coal in the old days, but because that's sold now as burning in grates, it's not too bad.
Right.
Gasworks appeared all over London, even in places as central as Pall Mall. There's nothing left of any gasworks themselves, but you may have seen the enormous gas holders built to contain the town gas. They worked so well that some are still used today for our natural gas. The gas holders are made up of a number of huge metal tubes that slide up into themselves like a telescope. When gas is pumped in, the container will rise. If more gas is being used than is coming in, the holder will gradually fall.
Throughout the beginning of the 19th century, gas became more and more popular and lit more and more of London's streets and homes. But then it began to run into competition thanks to an invention by this chap, Michael Faraday.
Michael Faraday was born in 1791 in Newington Butts at the Elephant and Castle. The son of a blacksmith, he wasn't a wealthy man, and he had to educate himself. Faraday won a position at the Royal Institution and carried out chemistry experiments, but became famous for his work in the fields of electromagnetism and electrochemistry. Batteries had been around since 1799, but in 1831 Faraday created a mechanical means of generating electricity that would change the world forever.
What Faraday did was invent an electrical generator, and I've got a mock-up of his experiment here. What I've done is to wind copper wire around this tube. You see, it's a hollow tube I can stick my finger in, and I've wound about 100 turns of copper wire around it, and they come together and are connected to this tiny little LED here. And if I put a magnet inside, here is the magnet, put it inside the tube, as it moves through the tube, it will induce an electric current in that copper wire. Now I'm going to put a cap on the end, and then I'm going to shake the tube up and down so that the magnet is moving backwards and forwards. And if you look very carefully, you should see the bulb light up. Look! Look! You can see it glowing. I know it's not very bright, but with a bit more wire and a bit more shaking, we'd be able to light the whole of London. And indeed, that's what happens, because that is how all our electricity is generated today. Well, not by chaps shaking magnets, but by magnets moving through coils of wire.
Early electric power stations were quite small, but when the national grid was set up in 1938, huge power stations were built across London to cope with demand. The now derelict Battersea Power Station, built by Sir George Gilbert Scott, was the first of the new national grid stations. But even before the national grid was set up, some electric light had made its way into London. I went along to the Institution of Electrical Engineers by Victoria Embankment, one of the first places in London to be lit by electricity. In the early 1800s, the only practical way of turning electricity into light was the carbon arc. And I'm going to make one here. Now, I know it's very bright, and so I'm going to put on these rather cool shades. I've got two carbon rods here, one here, and they're connected to an electrical supply. And if I touch them together, I'll get a short circuit, but then I'm going to take them just a few millimeters apart. Just watch what happens. You get this amazing arc, which is just electricity jumping across that gap from one rod to the other. Now, the real problem with this is that it's much too bright to use in the home. It would just dazzle everybody. There's also a technical problem. You can see that the rods are burning away because of the enormous amount of energy there, which meant if you wanted to keep one of these going, you had to devise complicated mechanisms to keep moving the rods closer together. Nevertheless, they were used in some lighthouses. Michael Faraday went and experimented at South Foreland, and later Dungeness had a carbon arc for a lamp. But for domestic use, they were really no good at all. The problem of domestic lighting was eventually solved by incandescence. That's passing electricity through a filament so it glows bright enough to make a good light. And that means about 2000 degrees. Now, Faraday and all the early Victorians knew about that, but they couldn't find a material which would work for them. For example, if you pass electricity through a copper wire, it will warm up to about 1100 degrees and then it melts. And that's not nearly bright enough. But eventually what they did was to put filaments in bulbs and pump the air out so they couldn't burn, but they still needed a material that wouldn't melt. And the two main inventors chose carbon. Now, there was the American Thomas Alva Edison, and over here, a chemist in Gateshead called Joseph Wilson Swan. Edison thought he could do it with fibres of bamboo, which he carbonized, that's like making burnt toast, and then put in the bulb, pumped the air out, switched on the electricity, and it didn't work. They always found hot spots and burnt out. Swan realized that what you needed was homogeneous fibres that were exactly the same, and he made the first ever synthetic filaments, carbonized them, put them in bulbs, and they worked. Edison tried to sue him, and Swan said, "Don't be ridiculous, I've been making these for years," and eventually they combined forces to make the Edison-Swan United Electric Light Company, and that's why we now have light bulbs, and instead of carbon, we use tungsten as the filament. But we still have to thank Joseph Wilson Swan.
Today, our city thrives on electricity. What was once a luxury, we now take very much for granted. Wasted energy in the London area alone creates over 3 million tonnes of carbon dioxide every year. That's enough to fill Battersea Power Station nearly 2,000 times. Perhaps we should think again about how our energy is produced and used if we are to safeguard our future.
Thousands of years, Britain's favourite drink has been beer. It may have caused a few problems, but its production and its consumption have really helped to shape the city. When the Romans arrived, they called the Brits the sons of the malt. But although the ancient Britons loved their beer, they hadn't actually invented a place you could go and buy a pint.
Those civilised Romans brought the first pubs to Britain, and their arrival was linked to one of the Romans' biggest legacies, their roads. Borough High Street, near London Bridge, follows the course of an old Roman road. This important route was probably home to some of the first pubs in London. The early Roman taverns are long gone, but there's still some evidence of the medieval coaching inns.
And a lot of the names are still preserved in these curbstones. There's the Spur Inn in Kentish and York, and of course the Tabard, made famous by Chaucer because it crops up in the Canterbury Tales.
Most of Borough High Street's old inns were destroyed to make way for the railways in the 19th century, but one still survives.
And this is it, the George, the last coaching inn in London. In its time, incredibly important, a sort of combination of a mainline railway station and a stock exchange, both a transport hub and a centre of commerce, and offering food, drink, entertainment, all that stuff.
This dates from 1542, but almost certainly there was a pub on the site long before that. It used to have 3 sides, 1, 2, 3, but 2 of them were demolished for the Northern Railway. In its heyday, 50 coaches every day would have left this courtyard for destinations all over the country. And that's not all. Quite apart from the transport centre and the finances going on downstairs, this gallery was a perfect place to watch plays, because they performed plays in the courtyard here. It was copied later by the Globe, which is just across the road, and Shakespeare himself lived round the corner. He almost certainly had a pint here and probably watched his own plays being performed in the courtyard. Fabulous place.
But of course the biggest draw was having a beer.
For all the customers in the inns, the main drink was ale, which naturally attracted the attention of the government, and that's been going on, well, for a long time. Indeed, in AD 975, King Edgar decided that his subjects were drinking far too much, and he introduced this. This is a pegged pottle. Now, the pottle is a 4-pint container which was for sharing round the pub, basically, but he introduced the idea of putting pegs in the side, look, all the way down the inside. And the rule was that no man was allowed to drink more than 1 peg's worth, that is, from 1 peg down to the next, then you were supposed to pass it on. And, oh, just a minute, I haven't quite got down to mine yet. There. That's my share. Like most edicts of the nanny estates, this one was a complete failure because it meant that you couldn't just have a little drink. Well, once you'd started, you've got to go down to the next peg, haven't you? So, in fact, after the edict, people drank more beer than before. And what's more, it gave us a new expression in the English language, to take someone down a peg or two, which apparently meant drinking somebody else's beer.
Inns weren't the only places to have a drink in medieval London, though.
I'm on my way to one of the oldest taverns in London, and indeed one of the hardest to find. This building site here is obviously in Holborn, but apparently this pub is somewhere else. The locals like to keep its location secret, and there's a terrible curse on anyone who reveals how to get there. Excuse me, mate. Where are we?
You're in Cambridge, mate.
In Cambridge?
Yes.
But that's Holborn.
Well, you're in Cambridge now.
I don't understand.
And the reason for all that is this lovely church, St Etheldreda's,
which you can see was built in the 13th century, but actually the foundations go right back to the 6th century. Now, in medieval times, the Bishop of Ely was one of the most important people in the church, and so naturally he had a town house in London, which was actually a bishop's palace. And so all of this area was part of the demesne of Ely. The bishop's palace is long gone, but one of the bishops, Bishop Goodrich, decided that his servants needed somewhere to drink. Well, allegedly he built a pub. It's dark in here. Doesn't look very promising to me. Oh, hey! Ye Olde Mitre Tavern, named after Bishop Goodrich's hat. I must go in and see what it's like inside. And do you know there's still a Cambridge connection today? John, hi. Could I have a pint, please?
Of course.
I gather you still get postcards addressed to you in Cambridge.
That's correct, sir. Would you like to have a look at it?
That's fantastic. Look at that. This is addressed to Scotty, Ye Olde Mitre, 1 Ely Court, Ely Place, Cambridge. What difference did it used to make being in Cambridge?
Well, we applied for a licence from Cambridge.
Really?
Yeah.
What about the police?
Oh, the police couldn't come down the alleyway up till 1978.
They couldn't come down here?
No, because we came under Cambridge laws.
Well, let's drink a toast then to Cambridge.
Cheers.
Cheers. Oh, it's a nice pint. Thanks very much.
Back in the Middle Ages, the common man drank ale, which was made from malted barley, water and yeast. However, it had a major drawback. It went off quickly. But a new ingredient was about to change all that. I've come here to Fuller's, one of the oldest breweries in London, to find out about that mystery ingredient.
This is Georgina, and she's brewing manager, so you know all about brewing, right?
I do.
Right. Now tell me about these hops. What are they?
Well, hops are basically perennial plants that are part of the cannabis family, Cumulus luculus, and it's the flowers that we're really interested in, because that gives us the compounds that we need for brewing. This is a hop sample that was taken back in harvest time.
Ah.
At the bottom of the petals, you've got the lupulin glands here.
Oh, I see. These yellow bits on the end.
They contain the resins and the oils. And it's the resins that impart the bitterness into the beer,
right,
and the oils that give the beer its wonderful hoppy aroma.
But why did it matter when they were first introduced?
Well, they also have bacteriostatic properties, so that means that they will suppress any microbial infection. So beer then became a lot safer to drink than water back in the sort of 15th century when hops were first introduced.
Right.
The introduction of hops to British ale led to the industrialisation of beer brewing. Medieval businessmen took over from home brewers, and London's first recorded brewery opened on this site in 1581. Sadly, they stopped brewing here in the summer of 2006.
Now, these newfangled hops and industrialised brewing was all very well, but it wasn't actually very popular with Londoners because they didn't like the taste of this new bitter beer. So when they went into the pub, they would ask for a bit of the new bitter, and then they'd stop the landlord in his tracks and say, that's enough of that, I want some old-fashioned sweet ale in with it. So then the landlord had to go to another pump, and then they say, right, stop. I'd now like a bit of old stale ale, just to flatten the taste down a bit. So you'd have to get a glass from under the counter and tip that in and make a sort of disgusting mess. And this was called three-thread. Yes, well, anyway, it was obviously a terrible nuisance for the publican, a whole lot of faffing around. And the breweries had to find a way around that to make his life easier. And they came up with this new stuff called porter. I've come to Greenwich to a modern microbrewery called the Meantime, where they're trying to recreate the porter of the 1750s. What is this stuff called porter?
Porter was a dark, strong, hearty beer that all the brewers of the time would have produced for all the thirsty Londoners. The porter we brew is our interpretation of a 1750s porter, the beer that made London great.
The Meantime Brewery uses a blend of 9 malted barleys to produce their version of London porter.
And then
that's
chocolate.
Yeah.
Is that going in?
We only want 5 kilos of that.
Ah.
The barleys are roasted to different strengths, hence names like Vienna, Munich and chocolate. Then, as we see here, they're milled together. The next stage involves heating this ground mixture or grist in hot water. This process draws out the wort or sweet sugars, which are then boiled with hops before being fermented to make alcohol.
The important thing about the boil is that it sterilises the wort. And that was the great thing about beer, was while we're a beer drinking nation, because beer was safe to drink because it was boiled.
Yes, got rid of all the bugs. Now, the bit that I'm interested in is the time it comes out of the bottle. Do you think we could try that?
I thought you might say that. Should we go and have some?
Yeah, let's. Why was it called porter?
It found favour with particularly with the London porters, people doing heavy manual work outside, and the name porter stuck.
Keep them going for hours, a pint or two of that would.
It was a significant, hugely important part of Londoners' everyday diet. They really did depend on this as a staple.
What difference did it make to London?
I mean, this stuff is literally liquid London. It had a huge effect. Porter could be brewed in bigger bulk. It enabled people to brew for a longer period of the year and was cheaper. The significance of porter is absolutely immense. We tend to forget today exactly what porter did for the economy of the country.
Porter provided cheap sustenance for the early industrial workers, but the huge profits the brewers made helped the Industrial Revolution to take hold. They invested in new technology, state-of-the-art beam engines, like this one, which used to push beer around the old Albion brewery in Shoreditch. But with the prosperity of the 18th century came a deadly scourge from abroad in the form of gin.
London's pubs have always been a godsend to thirsty wayfarers like me. In fact, I wouldn't mind dropping in for a pint this minute. And once the brewers had found out how to make beer that didn't go off in 5 minutes, they soon got a whole lot more customers. By the 18th century, it was possible to store beer, and the number of inns, alehouses and taverns grew enormously. In London, the taverns particularly prospered because there were loads of moneyed professionals only too happy to be relieved of some of their money in exchange for a bit of fun. In fact, the great Dr. Johnson said, "There is nothing that has been contrived by man in which so much happiness is produced as a good tavern." Well, I'm going in to have a look. As you can see, it's not at all flashy. It's comfortable and convenient, just the sort of place that men and women would have come to enjoy themselves, for leisure, in fact, like today's pubs. They would have come to gamble and to drink, and public drunkenness was quite acceptable in those days. It wasn't a problem in any way. But in fact, although this place looks very authentic, it is in fact a bit of a sham, because originally it wasn't a pub at all. It was a coffee house. This was a place where city gents would have come in off the street and sat at these very tables over cups of coffee and done amazing deals, huge financial transactions. The thing is that tea and coffee had begun to be imported and the price was coming down. They were made with boiled water, so they were as safe to drink as beer, and they were acceptable at all levels of society. However, the main threat to beer wasn't the tea and coffee, it wasn't even the rise in porter. The real problem was the gin. Until the late 17th century, distilling spirits had required a licence, but William III did away with this, which meant that anyone could make gin. Its low price and strong effects made it an instant hit with the poor, who drank it in huge quantities. All this drunkenness wreaked havoc with the health of the population, and for the first and only time in its history, London's population began to fall, all due to the pernicious influence of gin. For the first time, drinking heavily started to become socially unacceptable. The government had a unique solution: drink beer instead. Cheaper beer was eventually an effective antidote to gin fever, but not to drunkenness. The most enduring legacy of gin fever has been in the style of pubs, which we still call gin palaces. Most actually date from after the worst excesses of gin fever were over, but the gin palace, with its idea of enticing customers in for a drink, did introduce a whole new glitzy style to London. Wow. This is amazing. It's called the gas and glass effect because there are mirrors and glass absolutely everywhere. And of course, for the drinkers of 150 years ago, the effect would have been even more dramatic because they lived in a much less illuminated world than we do. The original idea in the gin palaces was to act as a beacon for the poor, to attract them into this warm and vibrant atmosphere. And later on, pubs like this one copied the idea to make them much more extravagant places. The decor dates from the 1870s, and the pub would have catered for all the staff and the servants from St James's Square, the big houses 100 yards down the road. It would have given a taste of above-stairs living to the below-stairs clientele. The pub's pretty small, but it used to be divided into a series of even tinier snug bars. And one theory is that all these mirrors here weren't here for decoration at all, but were put in by order of the local magistrates to try and make those snug bars less private and cut down on casual prostitution. Glass played a key role in developing the character of our pubs. The cut and etched front windows kept prying eyes away, but gave passers-by a hint of what was inside. The opulence of the brilliant cut mirrors and acid-etched glass inside gave drinkers an experience unlike anything else in the rest of their lives. There was heavy competition between the breweries, and they spared no expense on ornate embellishments to attract customers to their pubs. Making this style of glasswork was once a thriving industry, but changing fashions and costs have meant that few firms still specialise in these techniques. I caught up with some of London's last acid etchers to find out about the process. Hi, Derek.
Hello there.
Now, how do you make these beautiful patterns in the glass?
Well, it's all done with acid etching.
Acid?
Yes, it is acid, yes.
Which eats its way into the glass?
Yes.
Oh, it's Queen Victoria, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, she's lovely. The pubs I've been in, they've got sort of birds on them.
Yes, most of them.
Is that more traditional?
Yes, that is more traditional.
So have you got any of those around?
Yes, we have. If you go see what Diane's doing here.
Hi, Diane. What are you actually doing? Is that the acid you're painting on?
No, this is actual acid resist paint to stop the acid attacking this area.
Ah, so underneath that it's going to stay clear?
Yes.
I understand. And you're just doing the outline, is that right?
Yeah, just doing an outline around the bird and the leaves.
Wow, that is very delicate. It must take hours.
It does. It's a very time-consuming job.
Do you think I could do it, or would I make a great mess of it?
Yep, sure, you can have a go.
You sure?
Yep.
I might mess up the whole thing.
That's okay.
Can you rub it off afterwards?
Yeah.
I'll stop there. So these are going to be the bright bits.
Yes.
What happens next?
Then it goes under an acid.
So this must be some strong acid that eats the glass. Is it hydrofluoric? You don't want to get that stuff on your hands, do you?
No.
No. So, OK, so now this has been etched once.
Yes, it's been under one acid.
The areas to be protected during the second acid bath are painted over before the glass is treated again.
And then how does it finish up?
Well, this would be the finished article.
Right.
But it's got to go under acid one more time and then it's got to be cleaned up.
Right.
Okay, John.
Hi, John.
Final tone now. It's finished.
Hydrofluoric acid is poured over the glass and left to eat away at the surface for 20 minutes. The glass is then washed and the protective paint is rubbed off. Then the final pattern is revealed.
Well done.
Thanks, John.
So this is finished now, is it?
Yes, it's all finished.
It is stunning. So you've got several different colours here. You've got the clear bits around the edge, and then you've got this white.
Yes.
That's not just paint.
No, this is white acid. Then you've got a half tone.
Right.
And then you've got the full tone, which is the background. This is the full tone.
OK, so you've got 4 different tones.
Yeah.
How long do you reckon that takes you to do?
Approximately 6-7 hours.
Right, so that's a day's work, basically.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's absolutely beautiful. I want some for my front room, please.
Yes.
Can I have elephants on it?
You can.
Excellent.
The Argyle Arms, just off Bond Street in the West End, has some more great examples of acid etching. It's a real showpiece of the Gin Palace style.
There was another good reason for using all this glass in London pubs. It got cheaper. The thing was that the government abolished the glass tax in 1845 and the price of glass came tumbling down. So instead of just using it for the decor, which was wonderful, they also used it for the mugs. Before that, they'd all been drinking out of pewter mugs like this, and of course they couldn't see what they were drinking. Then in came the glass beer mug, and they could see what they were drinking, and they didn't like it much, all this murky stuff. It looked pretty horrible. And along came rival beers brewed up at Burton-on-Trent and places like that. Lovely, clear, pale ale. And that, sadly, was the end of London Porter and the end of London as the brewing capital of the world. Ah, delicious.
But London's thirst for beer hadn't diminished. Throughout the late 19th century, there was a huge boom in pub building in London, and it even became a way of funding whole streets' worth of housing development. Eventually, though, boom led to bust, and not many pubs have been built in the last 100 years.
One of the few pubs that was built during the slump was this fabulous one, the Black Friar. This pub stands close to the site of the old Blackfriars Monastery, which is how it gets its name. And there's also allegedly a Henry VIII connection. Look at this. It says, it is believed that the Emperor Charles V, the papal magistrate, and Henry VIII's court sat on this very site during the dissolution of Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon in 1532. Well, he may have dissolved his marriage, and he certainly dissolved the monasteries, but luckily he didn't dissolve the pubs. This place is unique. It must be the only pub to be decorated in this hopelessly over-the-top Art Nouveau style. All around the walls, these wonderful friezes in copper and plaster of jolly monks enjoying themselves. And through here, there are some valuable words of advice. I think this must be the snug, but it feels like the crypt of a rather grand church. Look at that fabulous ceiling, all mosaic tiles and monks with bat's ears. And then round the walls there are mottos. Silence is golden, industry is all, haste is slow, finery is foolery. This place was almost demolished in the 1960s, but luckily there was a great campaign led by the poet laureate, Sir John Betjeman, and it was saved for the nation. Now, I reckon this must have been the first ever theme pub. It's a pity that the modern ones aren't anything like so good. Anyway, I would like to drink a toast to Sir John Betjeman and the jolly Black Friars. Cheers. London has always celebrated the lives and achievements of its foremost citizens, and some of the capital's most fascinating stories are told in its statues and its monuments. London is littered with monuments, both ancient and modern. There are statues of our kings and queens, of pioneers and great thinkers, and of course memorials to those who have lost their lives in wars and disasters. Probably the greatest tragedy that hit London was the Great Fire of 1666, and it started just about 100 yards up there in, look, Pudding Lane. And after it was all over, they built a monument to commemorate the fire, and here it is, the monument. It's 202 feet high, by far the highest building in Europe at the time, and it's 202 feet from the place where the fire started. And now, sadly, I've got to climb 202 feet. The monument is the tallest freestanding stone column in the world. Designed by Sir Christopher Wren and Robert Hooke and constructed of Portland stone between 1671 and 1677, the simple Doric column is topped by a flaming copper urn to remind us of the Great Fire. Hi James.
Hello Adam.
Now, you are, as I understand it, the historic buildings architect for the City of London.
That's right, yes.
So you know all about this historic building?
Well, I know quite a bit, but not everything.
Now, it's inside here, it's what, about 10 feet in diameter?
Yes, something of that order.
Why did they build it hollow?
Fundamentally, because it's cheaper and it's standard building practice to just build walls of sufficient thickness to make the building stand up. But the people who built it, especially Hooke and his close acquaintance and working colleague Wren, were men of science. Wren was an astronomer, Hooke had invented telescopes, and this was an ideal place to continue experiments they'd been conducting in 300-foot deep wells.
Right, so this is a well upside down, as it were?
Absolutely, yes.
Hooke and Wren would probably have conducted any such experiments from the basement area of the monument. It's quite steep, this, isn't it?
It is.
Quite awkward too. Oh, so this is it. This is, you reckon this was Robert Hooke's lab, as it were?
Yes.
And can you see straight up? Wow, it's quite sort of scary looking up there. Tell you what, I'd really like to try one of these pendulum experiments. Why don't you go up there and I'll wait down here and wait for the pendulum to come down?
All right, thank you very much. I'll do that.
It's a pleasure. Happy climbing. While James climbed the 311 steps to the top of the monument, I did the very important and far less energetic job of staying in the basement and waiting for him to lower his pendulum. I'm touching it, so it's obviously not central. And I reckon that, you know, to get it to central, we'd need to bring it over this way about, something like a foot. So obviously the tower is leaning a bit, because we know that strings with weights on the end hang straight down towards the centre of the earth. Hooke knew all about that, Newton knew all about that. I'm not surprised, frankly, that the tower is leaning a bit, because not only are there buses and trucks and the underground, but also there's the river only a few yards away with huge tides rushing up and down, and the whole lot of the local gravity is going to be distorted. So I don't think it's going to fall over. Suppose I start this swinging, and I will start it swinging straight across from here to there, all right, in a straight line, and you can see that it's going to swing in a neat straight line like that. Now, if we were to go away and come back in an hour's time, what would happen would be that straight line would apparently have moved round. So instead of going like that, it would be going across this way a bit. Because it will swing in a straight line in space. But meanwhile, the Earth is turning, and the Earth will turn underneath the pendulum, leaving the pendulum swinging where it was. So during the day, it will gradually move all the way around the room.
From the monument basement, it was originally possible to look right up out of the top of the copper urn into the sky. A lens at the top and a second lens at the bottom would have turned the pillar into a vertical telescope, allowing Hooke and Wren to track the Earth's movement by the stars. Sadly, this meant I would have to finally walk up those stairs if I was to see for myself.
James, I've made it. How many stairs do you say there were?
311 and then about another 20 or 30.
Well, I reckon you must have added a couple of hundred in from here. Now, it's getting very narrow here, isn't it? It's closing in.
Yes. This is the beginning of the vase or urn on top of the Doric column, which is what the monument is, and on top of that is the flaming orb.
Oh, I see, to represent the fire.
Exactly.
Fire.
Exactly.
Right. Do you mind if I don't actually climb up there?
I think it's a very good idea.
It looks very hairy to me.
Yeah.
Is it normally open at the top like that?
No, it's not. We've opened it so that you can see the sky.
Oh, wonderful.
Because this board, I'm afraid...
Oh, this board, that's why I couldn't see from below.
Exactly.
Many of London's grandest monuments commemorate war heroes. The most famous is right at the heart of the city.
This noisy place is Trafalgar Square, home of what is probably London's best known and best loved monument, Nelson's Column. They got scaffolding all the way up. Well, I guess I better go and see what's happening up there.
Trafalgar Square was designed by Sir Charles Barry in 1838, and a couple of years later, architect William Railton started work on a column to commemorate Vice Admiral Lord Nelson, who'd been killed during his decisive victory over the French and Spanish fleets in 1805. So the square came to be called Trafalgar Square. I was lucky. I turned up during a major restoration of the entire column, which gave me a rare opportunity to see the cleaning process and a chance to see Horatio himself up close. Unsurprisingly, London's biggest pigeon perch gets pretty dirty. More than 20 years' worth of pigeon poo is built up, not to mention the grime left by thousands of daily visitors. It's not just the column itself that's being spruced up. The faithful bronze lions that guard Nelson are getting a clean too. The bronze that sculptor Sir Edward Landseer used to cast the lions is said to have come from the melted down cannons of the French fleet. The lions were part of the original design for the square, but they were actually added about 20 years after Nelson's Column was erected. But that didn't mean they were not going to get a nice new wax and polish.
Right, so can I have a go?
By all means.
So just shove it in there.
Not too much. Not too
like
much.
that?
Yep, and just paint it on. Just spread it around.
Oh yeah. That's not bad, is it?
Well, you can see the colours.
Do you think I can make a lion waxer?
That's the one.
I'm going to apply for a job waxing lions. Doesn't seem to have any effect at all.
It will.
Will it?
Time.
How long do I have to do it for?
Well, until you get the shine coming through.
It's worse than cleaning my shoes.
Takes a while.
Come back next week.
I was surprised to find out there was even more brass on the column itself, but this time I wasn't volunteering to help clean it.
Now, Adrian, what on earth is this? Is this bronze?
This is all bronze. There's 4 bas reliefs at the base of this column.
This is bas relief?
This is a bas relief, yes.
Okay, and so these aren't carved, these are casts, are they?
These are actually casts, and they're made up of a number of pieces, which we couldn't really tell before the wax was removed, but now the wax has been removed.
So this arm, because to have a mould that included this detailed hand would be impossible, wouldn't it?
Be, exactly.
Yeah.
The 4 bronze bas reliefs were made from French guns captured by Admiral Nelson himself, and they depict his greatest triumphs. The victory off Cape St. Vincent, the bombardment of Copenhagen, the victory of the Nile, and finally, Trafalgar. Nelson's Column is frequently used as a measurement of height.
However, during the restoration it was found that instead of towering 185 feet above Trafalgar Square, the column, including the 17-foot statue of Nelson, is a mere 169 feet and 5 inches high. It still felt pretty high to me when I got to the top. It looks wonderful. What are these sort of lumpy bits?
These are areas where there was mortar which had been put in the past to possibly defects in the stone.
Oh, wow!
So we've taken the mortar out, we've taken out as little stone as possible, and then we're now fashioning masonry indents to suit the hole.
So this is cement, is it?
No, this is actually Craigleith sandstone.
You mean the same as this stuff?
Exactly the same. The quarry's no longer open, but we were donated some Craigleith sandstone from Watson Stonecraft in Edinburgh. So we were really lucky actually to get this.
But hang on a second, how do you get it to that shape?
The guys have got banker tables that they work on. They set this in a piece of sand, and then they just carve it from the stone, get it into a square shape, take a template of this, and then fashion the indent to suit the hole.
That sounds quite complicated. How long does it take?
This one took a day and a half to do.
Just to wow!
And he's got to fix it yet as well. But the level of masonry, degree of masonry craft skill to get that is first class.
That's going to be fantastic, isn't it? You'll hardly notice that. By the time it's stuck in and got a bit dirty, it'll look just the same.
Exactly. Well, the stone will oxidise over a period of time, and it will actually start dulling down to a grey colour.
I'm lucky to have come face to face with Horatio. Nelson's column is a famous landmark, but not many people get to stroke his fevered brow. A clean-up like this happens only every 20 years or so, but it ensures this unique monument is preserved for generations to come. London's monuments come in all shapes and sizes and date back from all sorts of periods in our history. But Britain's oldest monument is down here on the embankment. It's 3,500 years old, and it's Cleopatra's Needle. The 60-foot-high granite obelisk was originally erected in the ancient Egyptian city of Heliopolis on the orders of Thutmose III around 1450 BC. It was presented to the United Kingdom in 1819 by the Viceroy of Egypt. But Cleopatra's Needle didn't come to Britain until 1877, when Victorian engineers finally found a way to move the 200-ton obelisk and erect it using a kind of crane on London's embankment. So how on earth did the Egyptians manage it 3,500 years ago? This is my obelisk, okay? I know it's a bit crude, but it gives the idea. And I want to put it on this plinth here, so it stands up like that, okay? It weighs an awful lot. So the Egyptians wouldn't have had the cranes to lift it up like that. They would have had to have a very cunning way of doing it. So what they did was to build walls around this. So there's a wall here, there we go, push that down there, and there's a wall here, and I'm going to put a door in this hole like this, so it's blocked up for the moment. And the idea is to get this obelisk balanced up here and then very slowly tilt it over so it lands on the base, and then it only requires a tiny push to get it upright, and with luck it would be a few blokes with ropes. But how do they get it up here? Because the Egyptians didn't have huge cranes. But they had an enormous amount of cunning and an enormous amount of sand, because most of Egypt is desert. So first of all, they filled this. Of course, this wasn't really a box. There was just an empty space here. They would have tilted it out so they had an enormous ramp from miles away, probably hundreds of yards away over there. And then they fill the whole of this inside with sand as well. And then they could have got a load of blokes with ropes to pull this thing up this long, long ramp here, and as long as the ramp is shallow enough, you can pull huge heavy weights with men with ropes. And they gradually pull it right across until it rests just on this edge like that. And then chaps, brave men, go in with shovels and start taking away the sand from the inside. And of course, as the sand disappears from under this end of the obelisk, with luck, it'll begin to fall down. I'm quite glad that I wasn't underneath the end of this obelisk, because there must have been moments here when it could have gone at any time. Ah! very nearly. You see, the idea, if I got it just a little bit slower, it would have gone onto there, and then you would have had some blokes standing up here on this wall with ropes. And to be honest, it's really not a great effort to push it. Well, I've still got some sand on my plinth. It needed a bit more care. I think maybe those Egyptian engineers were a bit more skillful than I am. Anyway, to find out about the obelisk, I've got a chap down here who knows everything. This is Chris Elliott, who's writing a book about Egyptian London. So, Chris, tell me about this thing. It comes from Egypt. Is it really Cleopatra's Needle?
Actually, it's got nothing to do with Cleopatra.
Oh!
Afraid not. It was only set up in Alexandria approximately 20 years after she died. It was on the beach. It fell down in about the 14th century in an earthquake. It had been set up there by Caesar Augustus in about 10 BC.
Right.
He had taken it from where it was originally set up, which was outside the Temple of the Sun at Heliopolis, now one of the suburbs of Cairo.
Right. So, this is presumably bronze, is it?
Yes.
Oh, makes a good noise, yes. Now, what are these chaps doing here?
Well, they're guarding the obelisk, and technically speaking, they're the wrong way round. They should be facing the other way, yeah. But that's if you want to get picky.
Right, so what should they be doing facing the other way?
Well, they're normally flanking the sun disk.
Okay, so they're looking out east and west, as it were.
And the obelisk is a symbol of the sun god. The ancient Egyptians set them up in pairs, either side of a temple doorway or gateway, as symbols of the sun god. And originally, the top, the pyramidion, the little pyramid at the top, would have been gold plate tips, and you can imagine what they looked like when the sun caught them.
So, if this isn't Cleopatra's Needle, what do we call it?
Well, Tutmosis obelisk would be the most correct.
How about Tut's pointy thing?
As long as you don't get him mixed up with Tutankhamun.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Oh, well, we'll think of something.
Solid stone statues and monuments have to be able to support their own weight. For instance, with stone statues, every outstretched arm needs to rest on something in order to stay up. But bronze cast statues appear in all manner of elaborate positions.
Obviously, solid bronze statues would be incredibly heavy. But luckily, thousands of years ago, some brilliant inventor came up with a way of making them hollow.
This is the UK's oldest working foundry, Morris Singer, established in 1848. The Singer Foundry has cast many of London's best-known statues.
Now, Alex, you make bronze statues, is that right?
Yes, we do, yeah.
Now, when you bash one, it's obviously hollow. But surely, if you pour bronze into a mould, it's going to fill it up and you'll get a solid statue. How do you make hollow statues?
Well, we do it by using the lost wax method.
Lost wax?
Yes, so we create a wax copy or a wax replica of the pattern that we're given.
So this is the pattern?
Yeah.
So talk me through the process.
We cover him with silicone rubber.
And then you just slap it on, do you?
Yeah, then we just slap it on, and gravity will just sort of help it sort of fall into place how it did.
But it does spread out quite nicely, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And it goes all over the bench, I see. But anyway.
Well, yes. I mean that's just
that's no doubt happened before.
Yeah.
The rubber, when dry, is then peeled off and placed in a resin case to keep its shape.
Now you're not going to pour the bronze in here.
No, we don't. We start now by making the wax copy using this silicone rubber.
Right. So how do you do that?
Well, we start by painting 2 or 3 coats into the mould.
Paint the wax.
Paint the wax.
So you've got liquid wax. You've melted it. Right.
Hot liquid wax like this.
Right.
It is very hot.
Can I paint a little bit in, or
yes, you certainly
will
can,
I make a mess of it?
No. It'll be fine.
Anywhere?
Just anywhere you like.
Okay. I always knew I had an artistic streak in me. I don't think I've ever painted the inside of somebody's ear before.
Well, you're putting the wax back in the ear, really, aren't
you? The two sides of the mould are clamped together. Then Alex poured hot wax into the mould.
Oh, wonderful green glue.
And then we'll just swirl it around and count to 20. You need to constantly rotate it as well, just so you get an even coating.
Fantastic.
There you go, that's the hollow wax.
That's
plate.
it. So now you've got a positive copy of your pattern.
Yes.
Made in hollow wax.
Made in hollow wax.
We left the wax to dry a bit and then carefully took it out of the mould.
Ah! Hey! Hey! That's not bad, is it? That's terrific. You can see it's all hollow, and it's not as thick as that edge. It's only about, thinner than my fingers anyway. Yeah, it's...
We dipped our wax head in a liquid ceramic.
Okay, so this is now ceramic.
Yes, this is, yeah.
This will harden into stuff like China.
Yes, it will do, yes, yeah,
Right.
very much like China, yeah.
And that's on both the outside and the inside.
And on the inside, you can see on the inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll just place this in here and just coat it.
Oh, I can do this. It's a sandpit, isn't it?
It is big, he's taken a lot. That should be fine.
That'll do, will it?
Just empty it.
Once the ceramic is hardened, the wax can be melted out to make space to pour in the molten bronze. It runs through channels into the space where the wax was, and then it's left to cool in the ceramic shell. You can see on the side of the head the channels used for the molten bronze to flow into the sculpture. These will be removed, leaving only an elegant, hollow bronze head.
Oh, it comes off very clean, doesn't it?
It does come off very clean, yeah.
The process of lost wax casting hasn't really changed since ancient times. Who knows, maybe the Colossus of Rhodes was cast this way.
So, there you have it. They start with a solid plaster pattern. From that, they make a hollow wax replica, very, very light, and from that, they melt the wax out and they make this solid, well, it's not solid, it's hollow, but wow, it's heavy, this bronze replica, and that is fantastic.
New statues and monuments continue to be unveiled all over London, and many are far removed from the classical style of the 18th and 19th centuries. Sometimes they deeply divide public opinion. But however our new monuments are received, they continue to tell the ongoing story of our ever-changing culture.
In St. Paul's, Christopher Wren had them write, "If you want a monument, look around you." And London is like that. If you want to know about the story and the history of London, look at its statues and its monuments.